Under a merciless, torrential downpour, the towering stone sanctuary stands cold and forbidding, a silent witness to the dark carnage about to unfold inside. On the cold floor, a battered man gasps for air, coughing up a mouthful of dark crimson as his desperate time rapidly runs out. A brutal, lightning-fast strike erupts through his skull, shattering the silence and ending his pathetic pleas in an instant. Through the drifting smoke of a freshly fired weapon, a cold-eyed executioner stands tall, his deadly mission almost complete. He lowers his smoking barrel, his expression offering no mercy, yet his heart is heavy with the grim reality of what must be done next. He steps over a gruesome sea of fallen enemies, a silent slaughterhouse of those who dared to cross the line. But the true nightmare is just beginning. A sharp, piercing wail breaks the silence, leading his eyes to a critically wounded woman desperately shielding a newborn baby with their dying breath. Panic surges through his veins as he rushes to her side, his icy demeanor completely shattering at the sight of her pouring blood. He falls to his knees beside her, desperately checking the crying infant, praying that the child survived the brutal onslaught. She clutches a massive, fatal wound, her life force rapidly draining onto the cold floor as a terrifying realization grips them both. He begs her to stay still so he can stem the bleeding, but she softly shakes her head, knowing her time has already run out. She reaches out, her blood-stained hand gripping his with fierce, terminal affection, finding peace in the memory of their brief union. Looking at their crying child, she pleads with him to take the baby and flee, knowing the dark destiny that awaits them if they stay. With her final, fading breath, she begs him to raise their child far away from the blood and violence of the underworld. A serene, heartbreaking smile graces her lips as her eyes slowly lose their light, leaving him alone in the dark. Her hand slips away and she goes limp, leaving the heavy burden of the child's survival entirely in his trembling hands. He cradles the screaming newborn in the quiet room, a widow left with a promise he must keep, no matter the cost. Suddenly, a raspy, mocking voice sneers from the shadows, a barely breathing survivor spitting out a venomous final curse. The dying enemy glares with crazed, bloodshot eyes, screaming a horrifying prophecy of absolute vengeance. The beast warns that the cycle of blood will never end, promising that the next generation will bring ruin to everything he holds dear. Without a shred of hesitation, a single deafening gunshot silences the threat forever, sealing a bloody promise that will span decades. Years pass like a sudden storm, leaving behind the dark rain for a blinding, deceptively peaceful sky that hides a growing storm. Tucked away in a quiet, modern estate, a new life has begun, but the shadows of the past can never be fully erased. A young boy's agonizing scream echoes through the courtyard, struggling under a training regime designed for monsters. The legendary assassin, now a demanding father, stands resolute, pushing his young son's limits with unforgiving boxing mitts. The boy collapses in exhaustion, crying out against the daily hell of running, heavy squats, and endless swimming laps. The father lowers his gaze, demanding to know why a boy of his age was fighting and breaking bones at school. He reminds the child that this brutal punishment is the direct consequence of violating their sacred rule of restraint. Tears of raw frustration well up in the young boy's eyes as he defends his actions, fueled by a deeply painful wound. He yells that he only fought back because they mocked him for having no mother, demanding to know why he shouldn't defend himself. The father goes dead silent, the heavy weight of his past sins pressing down on his chest as he looks at his fiercely hurt son. Suddenly, a sharp, stinging flick cracks against the boy's forehead, shattering his defensive anger in an instant. The father looms over him, a dark aura radiating as he sternly warns against using violence for petty revenge. He delivers a cold, non-negotiable ultimatum: hit the mitts with everything he has or starve tonight. The boy's eyes widen in sheer, unadulterated terror at the ultimate threat of missing his beloved dinner. The father stands firm, knowing that survival in their world requires absolute, unwavering motivation. Driven by the primal fear of starvation, the boy unleashes a desperate, explosive scream of raw fury. He lunges forward, throwing a monstrous punch that slams into the mitt with shocking, bone-rattling power. A relentless barrage of lightning-fast strikes follows, revealing a terrifying natural-born talent inherited from his bloodline. The father watches grimly, immediately escalating the hellish training to forge the ultimate weapon of survival. As the sun begins to set, the boy's desperate cries of pain rise into the fading light of the sky. Dusk settles over the quiet house, bringing a temporary end to a brutal day of sweat and tears. Inside the quiet warmth of the home, the exhausting battle of the day finally gives way to a fragile moment of peace. The boy greedily devours his hard-earned meal, but his expression suddenly shifts as a heavy thought crosses his young mind. The sudden question catches the legendary assassin completely off guard, sending him coughing and sputtering. The boy innocently asks why they don't have a single photograph of his mother, desperate to know what she looked like. A heavy, cold sweat breaks out on the father's face as the ghosts of that bloody night claw their way back into his mind. Memories of her dying embrace flash before him, a painful reminder of the sacrifice that bought their current peaceful life. He quietly tells his son that she loved him fiercely to her very last breath, and that she was incredibly beautiful. The boy stares back with deadpan skepticism, sensing his father's awkward deflection, but the deadly secrets of their past are far closer than either of them realizes. The ticking clock on the wall breaks the comfortable silence of the kitchen, pulling the former legendary executioner back from his thoughts as he checks his watch. He notes the hour with a quiet sigh, realizing the peaceful day is rapidly drawing to a close. He pushes back from the table, announcing his sudden departure to his young son, who looks up with a half-eaten burger and wide, questioning eyes. The boy is instantly disappointed, wondering why his father must leave for work yet again, even on a weekend. Stepping out onto the manicured lawn under the warm sunset, the father lightly laughs it off, claiming that weekends are when his driving services are in the highest demand. But his son chases after him, shouting about automated cars on the news and calling out his father's outdated profession. The boy's playful teasing cuts deep as he boldly suggests his father find a modern career before technology leaves him completely obsolete. Behind his dark sunglasses, a cold sweat breaks out on the old assassin's face, his carefully constructed civilian cover under threat from his own flesh and blood. He stares back at the boy, wondering silently which side of the family gave his son such a brutally honest, cheerful mouth. Beneath the lighthearted banter, a heavy sense of guilt gnaws at his chest, knowing the boy has no idea why they live in constant hiding. The boy flashes a brilliant, gap-toothed smile, waving a cheerful goodbye as his father prepares to vanish into the evening. That innocent warmth is the only thing keeping the retired killer anchored to this fragile, peaceful life. Looking back at the quiet estate bathed in the golden hues of dusk, the father feels a painful ache in his soul, whispering to the ghost of his past that their son's smile looks exactly like hers. But the peace they bought with blood is a ticking time bomb, and the countdown is already nearing zero. Years blur together like a raging storm as the relentless march of time transforms the fragile child into a force of nature, his fists cutting through the air with terrifying velocity. A single, explosive impact shatters the quiet of their training courtyard, signaling that the dormant bloodline has finally awakened. Shirtless and covered in sweat, the young man unleashes a devastating, rhythmic barrage of strikes against the heavy bag, his muscles rippling with the terrifying power of a born predator. He has grown strong, perhaps too strong, nurtured by a regime designed to ensure his survival in a world he doesn't yet understand. Another bone-shattering blow erupts, the sheer shockwave of his fist vibrating through the training ground like a crack of thunder. The boy's raw, unbridled talent is undeniable, but it is a double-edged sword that threatens to draw the eyes of their oldest enemies. Standing in the shadows of the doorway, the aging legendary assassin watches his son with a mixture of pride and profound dread, quietly muttering that the inevitable has finally begun. The weapon has been forged, but the battle to keep him safe is about to get infinitely harder. Acknowledging his son's massive increase in power, the father coldly orders a brief rest before they transition into grueling evening weight training. He cannot afford to let the boy slack, not when the shadows of their past are constantly creeping closer. The young man gasps in sheer disbelief, his jaw dropping at the seemingly endless torture his father demands day after day. He is exhausted, pushed to the absolute brink, and he has finally reached his breaking point. Panting heavily, the son demands to know why he is subjected to this endless, brutal training if he isn't even allowed to go to college or become a professional athlete. The father simply turns his back, delivering a cold, frustrating promise that he will understand everything when the time comes. Slumping in the living room, the young man loudly laments his fate, joking that he's destined to become a lonely old man who does nothing but exercise. But the lighthearted atmosphere is instantly shattered as the TV screen flashes to life, broadcasting a sudden, urgent news segment. The father freezes in place, his sharp eyes locking onto the television screen as the news anchor announces a major shakeup in the criminal underworld, the official inauguration of Chongdo Group's new chairman. The screen displays the cold, ruthless face of Jin Dae-song, identifying him as the grandson and direct heir of the late infamous chairman Jin Dae-ho. The name echoes through the room like a curse, resurrecting a nightmare the old assassin thought he had buried decades ago. As the anchor details the new chairman's aggressive vow to claim absolute power and secure the group's future, the father's face hardens into stone. The cycle of blood has officially restarted, and the vengeful prophecy spoken by a dying man is finally coming to pass. A cold sweat of pure adrenaline breaks out across his face as he pulls out his phone, his mind racing to calculate their odds of survival. The peaceful life they built is gone in an instant, replaced by the grim reality of impending war. He turns to his exhausted son, his voice dropping to a low, commanding whisper that instantly cuts through the silence of the room. The young man freezes, sensing a sudden, terrifying shift in his father's aura. Without a single shred of his usual harshness, the father quietly tells his son to go wash up and change into clean clothes. The boy is left utterly bewildered, completely unprepared for what is about to happen next. Breaking a lifetime of strict rules, the father announces that training is officially canceled for the night and that they are going out for a proper dinner. The sudden kindness feels incredibly jarring, a calm before a devastating storm. A brilliant, pure smile lights up the young man's face, his heart overflowing with joy at the rare prospect of a normal father-son outing. He has no idea that this meal might very well be his last taste of peace. Their SUV tears through the evening streets, its tires humming against the asphalt as they leave the safety of their secluded estate behind. The city lights glow in the distance, a deceptive paradise hiding a trap that has already been sprung. Inside the car, the son eagerly chats about making this a regular family tradition, completely oblivious to his father's rigid posture and sharp, scanning gaze. The old assassin is fully suited up, dressed not for a casual dinner, but for a funeral. The father barely offers a quiet, distracted agreement, his eyes darting to the mirrors as his highly trained instincts scream that they are no longer alone on this dark highway. His worst fears are confirmed as his side mirror reflects a synchronized wall of black sedans matching their exact speed. The realization hits him like a physical blow. If there is a next time for a peaceful dinner, they will have to fight through hell to see it. Suddenly, the father violently swerves the steering wheel, the tires screeching in protest as he executes a high-speed maneuver to break away from the closing trap. The heavy SUV drifts wildly around a sharp corner, kicking up dust and smoke as the pursuit intensifies, transforming the quiet evening road into a high-stakes battlefield. Panic surges through the young man as he is thrown against his seat, shouting that this is definitely not the way to the restaurant, his confusion rapidly turning into sheer terror. He demands to know why his father isn't answering, but his voice dies in his throat as he looks into the rearview mirror and sees a line of black vehicles pursuing them with lethal, unwavering precision. From above, the trap is terrifyingly obvious. A highly coordinated convoy of black SUVs is systematically boxing them in, cutting off every single avenue of escape. With a grim expression, the father rams his vehicle through a side barrier, drifting violently into a desolate, abandoned industrial courtyard to force a final, desperate stand. The driver's side door swings open, and the legendary executioner steps out into the cold night air, his tailored suit hiding a lifetime of lethal secrets and his gaze locked onto the approaching threat. The young man leaps out of the passenger side, screaming for his father, completely overwhelmed by the sudden nightmare unfolding before his eyes. He desperately begs for an explanation, demanding to know why they are being hunted, his voice cracking under the weight of his mounting terror. The father looks back at him, his face a mask of absolute stoicism, as he quietly whispers that every parent harbors at least one dark secret they can never reveal to their children. His heart heavy with regret, he admits he had always hoped to explain the bloody truth of his past on his own terms, but the cruel hand of fate has robbed them of that luxury. The sound of synchronized footsteps echoes through the dark lot as dozens of armed, suited figures emerge from the shadows, instantly surrounding the father and son in a deadly perimeter. Terrified but fueled by adrenaline, the son steps forward, demanding to know if these killers were sent by the ruthless new Chairman Jin. The assassins stand in perfect, eerie silence, their faces completely obscured by bizarre, faceless wireframe masks that radiate a cold, professional desire to kill. The young man's eyes dilate in absolute shock, his brain struggling to process the terrifying reality of the underworld his father has kept hidden from him for his entire life. The lead assassin steps forward, his muffled voice confirming that events have moved far more rapidly than anyone in the syndicate had originally anticipated. He coldly explains that with the old chairman Jin Dae-ho finally dead, the executive board of the Cheongdo Group requires a trophy, specifically the legendary executioner's head, to prove their loyalty to the new regime. The leader unsheathes a gleaming, razor-sharp katana, warning them that those who hold true power in the underworld never forget a grudge, no matter how many decades have passed. He raises his blade, stating with chilling certainty that when blood relations are involved, the only acceptable payment for a past betrayal is absolute, total annihilation. With a collective, bloodthirsty rush, the masked assassins leap through the air, their blades flashing under the moonlight as they descend upon their targets with lethal intent. The son screams out in sheer panic, but the legendary assassin remains completely still, his posture relaxed and his breathing controlled as the storm of violence closes in. A familiar, terrifying heat surges through the old man's veins as his calloused hand tightly grips a hidden, tactical handle, his muscle memory instantly recognizing the weight of his favorite weapon of slaughter. With a fluid, deadly motion, he draws a lethal combat knife and a heavy tactical axe, his eyes flashing with the cold, merciless fire of a legendary executioner ready to tear the night apart to save his son. The silence of the night is instantly torn apart by a horrific spray of crimson as the legendary assassin strikes with lethal, terrifying precision. There is no warning, only the cold, hard reality of death descending upon the front lines. The nearest masked assailant freezes, his eyes widening behind his wireframe mask in pure, unadulterated shock. He has trained his whole life for combat, but he has never witnessed speed like this. Before the hunter can even raise his weapon to defend himself, the father slips into his blind spot, his movements a blur of effortless, deadly grace. The predator has instantly become the prey. With a sickening metallic tear, another life is extinguished in a fraction of a second. The old executioner does not hesitate, his blades carving a path of absolute ruin through the closing circle. Standing tall amidst the freshly fallen bodies, the father grips his combat knife and tactical axe, his posture radiating a chilling aura of absolute supremacy. To the remaining syndicate soldiers, he looks less like a man and more like a god of death. The lead assassin stares in disbelief, a shaky breath escaping his lips as the horrifying reality of their mission begins to sink in. The rumors were not exaggerated. He utters a designation that has not been spoken aloud in 20 years, Agent 101, finally acknowledging that the legendary ghost of the criminal underworld stands right in front of him. Behind his father, the young man watches in absolute horror, his throat tightening as he tries to process the sheer brutal power of a single axe swing. This is not the gentle father who raised him. This is a monster of unparalleled violence. The masked leader recovers his composure, mockingly complaining about the annoyance of deploying an entire army just to hunt down a single retired traitor. But as the surrounding syndicate members tighten their formation and raise their katanas, a dark, sadistic thrill fills the air. The ultimate prize is finally within their grasp. A low, dangerous chuckle rumbles in the father's chest as he slashes his blades through the air, daring them to try and take his life. If they wanted a slaughter, he is more than happy to oblige. The leader's heart skips a beat as he meets the old man's gaze, sensing a sudden, suffocating surge of killer instinct that paralyzes his very soul. With a cold sneer, the father mocks their numbers, declaring that a mere handful of second-rate killers could never hope to lay a finger on him. The ambient light catches the old assassin's face, illuminating a terrifying, blood-splattered grin that promises nothing but agonizing death to anyone who stands in his way. Inside the dark, cavernous courtyard, the sounds of metal clashing and desperate screams echo into the night, signaling the start of a relentless, high-stakes massacre. The father moves like a whirlwind of destruction, his blades severing arteries and shattering defenses with a level of combat mastery that defies human limits. Bringing his heavy tactical axe down in a devastating arc, he unleashes a strike fueled by the desperate, burning desire to protect his son at all costs. Sparks fly as a desperate defender barely manages to intercept the blow with his sword, the sheer kinetic force of the impact vibrating violently through the courtyard. But the resistance is utterly futile. With a sickening crack, the heavy axe blade shatters the steel sword like glass, continuing its lethal trajectory. A desperate gasp is cut short as the brutal strike connects, leaving another masked killer to collapse lifelessly onto the cold concrete. The surrounding mob hesitates, their ranks thinning rapidly as the legendary killer prepares his next devastating maneuver, his focus entirely unbroken. Gritting his teeth, the father tightens his grip on his weapons, ignoring the blood dripping down his face as he prepares to tear through the final wave of attackers. With a seamless, circular sweep, his blades cut a horizontal swath of destruction, sending multiple adversaries reeling backward in a shower of steel and blood. He stands momentarily in the quiet center of the storm, his breathing steady and his eyes scanning the darkness for any hidden threats to his boy. The battlefield is a grim testament to his legendary status. Dozens of heavily armed syndicate soldiers lie incapacitated, yet more keep pouring in from the shadows. Suddenly, an assassin leaps from the darkness directly toward the distracted young man, his weapon raised to strike him down mid-thought. The legendary executioner is always one step ahead, his blade flashing in a blinding arc that decapitates the ambush attacker before he can even complete his descent. Turning to his stunned son, the father calls out his name, urgently promising that he will explain the bloody truth later, but right now, survival is their only option. His voice is incredibly stern, yet laced with a father's protective desperation, commanding his son to empty his mind of all questions and doubts. With a powerful push, he delivers a single, absolute directive that cuts straight through the boy's panic. Run and don't look back. The young man's head spins in utter confusion at the sudden, jarring command, his instincts screaming at him to stay and fight alongside his father. But the father immediately throws himself back into the fray, holding off a fresh wave of swords to clear a path of escape for his only child. He unleashes a brutal, sweeping strike, forcing the syndicate lines to break and scattering the attackers like leaves in a hurricane. Screaming in sheer desperation and terror, the son finally forces his legs to move, sprinting away from the horrific slaughter as fast as he can. But a ruthless, masked assailant breaks away from the main group, pursuing the fleeing boy with his katana raised for a killing blow. Sensing the danger, the young man grunts, executing a desperate, high-speed evasion maneuver that barely clears the deadly sweep of the steel blade. He tears through a massive metal doorway, his heart hammering against his ribs as a pack of relentless killers pursues him into the dark structure. From behind, the father's commanding voice echoes through the rafters, ordering his son to get deep inside and take immediate cover. Standing at the threshold, the old assassin watches the pursuing pack close in on the doorway, his eyes flashing with a desperate final resolve. With a powerful, calculated kick, he smashes his foot into the support scaffolding of a massive stack of heavy steel pipes. The structural integrity shatters instantly, sending a cascading avalanche of solid metal pipes roaring down toward the entrance. A deafening explosion of crashing steel fills the warehouse as the massive pile collapses, completely burying the pursuing syndicate soldiers in a trap of heavy iron. Coughing through the thick cloud of rising dust, the young man shields his face, wondering if the nightmare has finally come to an end. The doorway is completely sealed by a chaotic barricade of crushed steel, silencing the screams of their pursuers and cutting off any immediate danger. He slowly lowers his arms, his wide eyes scanning the dimly lit warehouse as the heavy silence of the room settles over him. Suddenly, a familiar, calm voice breaks the quiet behind him, instantly causing his heart to leap into his throat. Turning around, the young man desperately asks if his father is hurt, his voice trembling with a mixture of relief and lingering terror. The father quietly reassures him that he's unharmed, but urges him to keep moving, warning that the syndicate's main forces will be hot on their heels in no time. Pointing toward a heavy exit door on the opposite side of the vast warehouse, he explains their final escape route. He commands his son to locate the self-driving getaway vehicle waiting outside and keep it on standby, promising to buy them just enough time before joining him in the shadows. Sweat dripping down his face, the son trembles as he tries to voice his desperate objections to leaving his father behind to face the slaughter alone. But the old man's gaze remains unyielding behind his dark sunglasses, his voice a flat, iron wall of authority that brooks absolutely no argument. Gulping down his terror, the boy realizes that his father is not asking for his opinion, he is commanding his survival. Suddenly, the deadly silence of the warehouse is shattered as the father senses a lethal presence closing in from the shadows and raises his heavy tactical axe to intercept the ambush. Cruel mockery echoes through the rafters as the enemy taunts the legendary assassin, claiming a retired relic of the past has no hope of surviving the night. Out of the gloom steps an entire legion of elite syndicate soldiers, their raised blades gleaming with cold, lethal promise under the dim warehouse lights. The lead killer sneers with sadistic glee, abandoning any plan for a swift death in favor of an agonizing, piece-by-piece execution. With a deafening roar that shakes the very room, the father commands his son to run, throwing himself directly into the path of the oncoming tide. Pushing off the concrete with explosive force, the old warrior springs forward, his ancient reflexes taking complete control as he bridges the gap in the blink of an eye. The violent collision of steel and iron erupts in a shower of brilliant sparks, a brutal shockwave of pure physical strength that rattles his opponent's bones. Gritting his teeth through a sudden grunt of pain, the old man holds his ground, feeling the relentless pressure of the syndicate's overwhelming numbers. Seizing a momentary opening, a masked assailant lunges from above, bringing down a heavy weapon to split the legendary agent in half. But the veteran executioner is a hurricane of destruction. With a lightning-fast horizontal sweep, he carves through the front lines, leaving a horrific spray of crimson in his wake. The sheer force of his devastating swing disarms another attacker, sending a heavy weapon spinning wildly into the air. Screaming steel meets steel once more as the father blocks a deadly katana strike with his combat axe, holding the line with raw defiance. Even under a cascade of relentless blade strikes, the legendary ghost stands firm, his unyielding defense striking pure terror into the hearts of the syndicate's finest. Farther down the dark corridor, the young man stops, his chest heaving as the horrific reality of what he just witnessed begins to sink in. The sheer speed and brutality of the violence have completely overloaded his senses, leaving his mind entirely blank in a state of absolute shock. Looking at the heavy exit doors ahead, he is plagued by a torrent of agonizing questions about his father's true identity and whether they can ever survive this nightmare. But he violently shakes his head, forcing his panic down as he desperately tries to focus on the single golden rule of survival. Stealing his resolve, he reaches out to grab the heavy metal doorknob, intent on reaching the getaway vehicle waiting outside. But as his hand wraps around the metal, his heart freezes. The handle is already slicked in fresh, dripping blood. He recoils in horror, his mind flashing back to the effortless, monstrous efficiency with which his father butchered their pursuers with a tactical axe. Tears of betrayal and confusion well in his eyes as he is forced to face the terrifying possibility that the gentle father who raised him is actually a cold-blooded monster. Suddenly, the sickening sound of tearing flesh echoes from the courtyard, forcing the boy to look back in sheer dread as his father's defenses finally slip. Coughing up dark crimson, the old man staggers under the immense physical toll, several blades having finally pierced through his guard. Taking ruthless advantage of his weakness, a syndicate soldier unleashes a devastating high-speed blade strike to finish off the weakened legend. With a horrific tearing sound, a heavy katana carves deep into the father's back, unleashing a massive, violent spray of blood into the air. For the first time in his legendary life, the unstoppable ghost falls to his knees, his physical body finally succumbing to the overwhelming, savage wounds. Screaming in absolute agony and heartbreak, the son watches his protector collapse, his entire world shattering in a single brutal second. The syndicate leader towers over the fallen legend, mocking him with the chilling revelation that every single escape route and contact he spent decades preparing has already been systematically annihilated. In the fading warmth of his conscious mind, a gentle memory of his late wife flashes before his eyes, her final pleading request to let their child live a normal life echoing through his soul. The father looks toward his panicked boy, a quiet, sorrowful confession forming in his heart. This bloody crusade was the only way to keep that sacred promise. For 20 long years, he hid his lethal past and endured an ordinary life, all to protect the one light left in his dark world. But he sacrificed everything just for the simple hope of giving his son a peaceful, ordinary future, free from the bloody cycle of the criminal underworld. But with his body broken and their escape route permanently sealed, the legendary assassin accepts that his ultimate promise cannot be kept. A cold, terrifying grin spreads across the old man's face as he reaches into his pocket and pulls out a simple lighter, a final, lethal plan taking shape. All around them, heavy industrial gas canisters hiss softly, filling the sealed warehouse with highly explosive, volatile fuel. Realizing the catastrophic trap they have walked into, the syndicate leader's eyes widen in absolute panic as he lunges forward to stop the fatal spark. With a soft, final whisper of his beloved son's name, the legendary agent looks toward the boy, his eyes filled with a father's ultimate sacrifice. The tiny spark of the lighter meets the heavily saturated air, instantly igniting a violent, blinding wall of pure, consuming fire. The young man's wide eyes reflect the roaring orange inferno as the world around him is engulfed in a fraction of a second. A colossal, earth-shaking explosion rips the warehouse apart, obliterating the syndicate's forces in a spectacular, devastating wave of destruction. Meanwhile, in a high-security penthouse far from the chaos, a ruthless underworld kingpin casually remarks that a simple capture would have been far too boring. By morning, news broadcasts across the city report on the massive, unexplained factory explosion, with authorities still scrambling to uncover the cause of the disaster. In a quiet city hospital, a sharp nurse fields questions from a team of persistent detectives, assuring them that their sole survivor remains stable but deeply unconscious. Lying silently beneath the clean hospital sheets, the young man rests, his body recovering from a mild concussion, while his mind remains trapped in the embers of last night. Satisfied for now, the lead detective instructs the medical staff to notify them the very instant the mysterious young man opens his eyes. The nurse quickly ushers the authorities out of the room, firmly insisting that the patient requires absolute quiet to heal. As the heavy hospital door clicks shut, the young man slowly opens his eyes to the sterile morning light, his heart immediately tightening as the horrific memories of his father's final stand come rushing back. The sterile ceiling of the hospital ward offers no answers, only a blank slate for the agonizing questions swirling in his mind. He has absolutely no clue who his father really was, or what nightmarish world he belonged to. Every single memory of his gentle, ordinary life now feels like a fabricated lie, leaving his mind trapped in a dizzying maze of confusion. Suddenly, the heavy silence of the room is shattered as a familiar figure looms over his bed, catching him completely off guard. So-Yeon looks down at him with a knowing smirk, teasingly calling out his terrible habit of pretending to be asleep whenever he wants to avoid the world. Sitting up, the young man feels a sudden rush of warmth as they calculate the staggering number of years that have slipped by since they last saw each other. She smiles warmly, recalling his childhood dream of becoming a simple traffic cop and expressing her genuine surprise that he actually grew up to be a real detective. But her path was never easy. She proudly recounts the chaotic day she subdued a group of dangerous thugs, catching the eye of her captain and cementing her place on the force. A bittersweet wave of nostalgia washes over them as they laugh about their childhood taekwondo sparring matches, remembering how his father would scold him whenever he cried. Despite the painful bruises and his father's harsh lessons, those innocent days now feel like a precious sanctuary compared to the bloody nightmare he just survived. But the heavy shadow of reality quickly falls over them as she presses him about the masked attackers who turned their lives upside down, demanding to know who they were. Seeing his hesitation, she fiercely insists that she isn't trying to interrogate him as a cop, she is simply terrified for his safety and wants to protect him. Softening her voice, she promises to hold off on any official questioning until he fully recovers, swearing to visit him every single day to ensure he has everything he needs. Her eyes brim with unshed tears of worry as she vows to do absolutely anything to help him, but their emotional moment is instantly shattered by a sudden jarring noise. The hospital room door flies open as a startled nurse gasps in shock, realizing that the mysterious, high-profile survivor is finally awake. Outside, the setting sun paints the sky in ominous hues of crimson and purple, a silent warning of the invisible dangers closing in on the quiet medical facility. Clutching a plastic bag filled with a fresh box of hot fried chicken, So-yeon prepares to bring a small piece of comfort to her recovering friend. At the front desk, the hospital staff instantly recognize her, smiling warmly and waving her through to the secure ward without a second thought. A deep blush creeps up her cheeks as she realizes just how obvious her daily visits have become to everyone in the building. But the lighthearted moment quickly evaporates as she notices a dark-haired nurse staring at her with an intense, unblinking glare. The nurse's cold, lifeless eyes seem to drill right through her, sending an instinctive shiver of apprehension down her spine. Brushing off the eerie encounter, So-yeon quickly scurries down the hallway, her heart pounding with a sudden, unexplainable sense of dread. Shaking off the panic, she bursts into the room with a cheerful shout, presenting the steaming box of chicken like a grand prize. His eyes light up instantly as he grabs the bag, his hunger momentarily eclipsing the dark clouds hovering over his mind. He eagerly tears into the food with a wide grin, playfully declaring that her company is infinitely better than any meal she could ever bring. Watching him eat, she smiles softly, noting that his insatiable appetite hasn't changed a bit since they were kids. But as she watches him, a flicker of doubt crosses her mind, wondering if his cheerful demeanor is just a brave facade to keep her from worrying. Beneath his happy expression, the weight of his father's sudden, violent death presses heavily on his chest, leaving an agonizing void in his soul. Every piece of the puzzle still refuses to fit, leaving him completely blind to the true nature of the conspiracy that destroyed his family. Holding the half-eaten chicken, he realizes he wants nothing to do with this dark, bloody world. He just wants his normal, peaceful life back. Deep down, a terrifying realization begins to dawn on him. Those ruthless, faceless killers from the warehouse might still be hunting for him. Looking at So-yeon's innocent face, a fierce, protective instinct takes over, making him swear to keep her completely out of the line of fire, no matter what. Suddenly, the heavy door swings open as a nurse enters the room, quietly announcing that it is time to administer his scheduled IV. The young man frowns in confusion, recalling that the doctor had explicitly stated his IV treatments were already finished. A suffocating tension fills the room as he looks up, realizing there is something deeply, terrifyingly wrong with the nurse standing before him. Without warning, the imposter's hand slips into her pocket, pulling out a gleaming, razor-sharp scalpel with terrifying precision. His eyes widen in sheer horror as the assassin lunges forward, the deadly blade flashing under the sterile hospital lights. Screaming a lethal threat, the killer drives the scalpel down, but So-yeon's lightning-fast reflexes kick in as she violently swats the weapon out of the assassin's grip. Capitalizing on the momentum, So-yeon unleashes a devastating textbook strike, slamming her fist directly into the intruder's jaw. The assassin staggers backward under the sheer force of the blow, her disguise beginning to slip as she reels from the unexpected counterattack. Chest heaving, So-yeon demands to know who the hell this crazy intruder is and who sent her to finish the job. But the killer recovers with inhuman speed, launching herself into the air with a savage, high-flying kick aimed directly at So-yeon's head. A brutal collision of limbs echoes through the room as So-yeon barely manages to block the devastating impact of the strike. Watching the deadly dance of violence unfold right in front of him, the young man screams out in pure terror, helpless to intervene. The assassin's eyes gleam with a sadistic, bloodlust-filled frenzy, her mind completely consumed by the thrill of the hunt. Before she can strike again, So-yeon lunges forward, her hands locking onto the killer's arm in a desperate bid to gain control. Realizing the terrifying strength and elite combat training of the assassin, So-yeon grits her teeth, putting every ounce of her physical power into the struggle. With a powerful, desperate surge of strength, she executes a perfect judo throw, slamming the assassin violently onto the hard linoleum floor. Gasping for air, So-yeon stands over the dazed killer, her mind reeling at the sheer insanity of the high-stakes assault inside a secure hospital. But as she looks to her friend, the young man's expression is dead serious, the cold reality of his father's warning finally locking into place. Grabbing her hand with a desperate iron grip, he locks eyes with her and delivers a chilling command. They have to flee the hospital immediately or they won't survive the night.
So-yeon's breath hitches in her throat as the weight of the young man's warning sinks in, her mind racing to comprehend the sudden terrifying danger.
Bolting down the sterile hospital stairs, the young man refuses to look back, his desperate escape instantly contested as So-yeon chases after him, demanding to know what is happening.
Piercing through the echoing stairwell, she demands answers, reminding him of her duty as a detective to protect him, but her authority means nothing against the faceless threat. He begs her to just follow him without question, his voice cracking with panic as he promises to explain everything once they are clear of this death trap. A cold, sickening realization washes over him. If these ruthless killers have already infiltrated the hospital, a mere detective's badge won't stand a chance against them. Memories of his father's final, brutal stand flash in his mind, bringing a horrifying truth to light. By staying near him, So-yeon is only painting a massive target on her own back. Reaching the emergency exit, he spins around to deliver a final, desperate plea, urging her to run the absolute second they hit the street. But his warning is violently cut short as a massive, dark silhouette erupts from the shadows, slamming him down with bone-crushing force. A sharp cry of agony escapes his lips as the impact rattles his skull, leaving him completely disoriented and helpless on the cold floor. So-yeon screams his name in pure horror, her heart stopping as she witnesses her childhood friend get utterly crushed in an instant. Before she can move to help him, a shadow drops from above, the disguised assassin launching a deadly, surprise descent aimed directly at her. Gasping for air, the young man struggles to clear his blurred vision, the metallic taste of blood filling his mouth as he fights to stay conscious. Through the haze of pain, his eyes widen in absolute terror as he sees the psychotic nurse pin So-yeon to the ground, a gleaming scalpel raised to strike. He tries to crawl forward to save her, but a heavy, ruthless boot violently slams down on him, pinning him to the concrete. A towering, bald brute looms over him with a sadistic grin, mockingly questioning why the syndicate sent such heavy enforcement to deal with a couple of kids. The mention of his orders sends a chilling shock through the young man's body, confirming that this is a highly coordinated professional hit. The towering giant casually orders his partner to wrap things up, while the twisted nurse giggles with psychotic glee at how easily they caught their prey. A twisted, red-eyed madness consumes the assassin as she looks down at So-yeon, her jealousy and bloodlust driving her to make the kill as slow and painful as possible. Grinning like a demon, she brings the razor-sharp scalpel inches from So-yeon's face, threatening to carve her apart as the young man watches in agony. But before the deadly blade can slice through flesh, an iron-tight grip violently locks onto the assassin's wrist, halting the fatal strike in midair. Channeling every ounce of his remaining strength, the young man unleashes a brutal, desperate punch, sending a shockwave of force directly into the killer's face. Driven by pure, protective fury, he roars a lethal threat, his eyes burning with an intense resolve to tear apart anyone who dares to touch her. With a devastating follow-up strike, he violently kicks the assassin away, sending her tumbling down the concrete stairs in a heap. He stands tall, a savage fire in his eyes as he commands the intruders to stay away from her, pushing his battered body past its absolute limits. Suddenly, a massive, thick hand wraps around his neck from behind, instantly cutting off his air supply and crushing his throat. The bald giant sneers, easily lifting him off the ground as he mockingly declares that he is finished playing nice with a stubborn rat. A suffocating wave of darkness threatens to take him as he gasps for air, his vision blurring while the giant slowly squeezes the life out of him. Out of nowhere, a blinding crackle of electricity rips through the air, striking the giant's back with a violent, high-voltage shock. The towering brute collapses to his knees with an agonizing roar, revealing So-yeon standing behind him, clutching a smoking taser with trembling hands. But the monster's sheer physical resilience defies logic as he forces himself back up, his face contorting in a rage-filled snarl as he readies a devastating counterstrike. So-yeon's breath hitches as she realizes her weapon barely slowed him down, leaving her completely defenseless against the giant's murderous wrath. Suddenly, a heavy fire extinguisher hurtles through the air, striking the giant squarely on the skull with a resounding bone-cracking impact. The massive assassin collapses face first onto the hard floor, knocked out cold, leaving the two friends standing in the sudden, ringing silence of the stairwell.
Panting heavily, the young man tries to catch his breath, his body trembling from the sheer exhaustion of the brutal encounter. Shaken to her core, So-yeon demands to know what kind of nightmare he has gotten himself into, her detective instincts screaming that this is far more than a simple assault. Terrified for her safety, the young man looks away and quietly begs her to turn back and return to her peaceful life before it's too late. He confesses the grim, agonizing truth that dozens of highly trained monsters just like these are the ones who hunted down and murdered his father. Looking at her, his heart aches with the terrifying realization that he would rather die alone than let her get dragged into the same bloody grave. But his self-sacrificing words are instantly cut short as she firmly taps his head, sharply reminding him that she is the detective here, not him. Her eyes lock onto his with unbreakable determination, fiercely declaring that she is a police officer and she will never walk away from a friend in danger. The young man can only look on in silent worry, knowing that her stubborn bravery will only lead her deeper into the line of fire. Taking charge, So-yeon immediately pulls out her phone, declaring that she will arrange personal protection and a secure safe house to keep them hidden. She cuts off his protests with a playful but firm warning, leaving him with absolutely no choice but to follow her lead. Slipping past the hospital's security lines, they step out into the ominous dusk, knowing they have officially crossed a line of no return. Under the cover of total darkness, they navigate the quiet city streets, eventually arriving at an isolated, familiar residence hidden far from the syndicate's reach. The heavy iron gate creaks open, offering them a fleeting, silent promise of sanctuary from the storm closing in around them. Looking around the dimly lit yard, a bittersweet wave of nostalgia washes over So-yeon as she realizes how many years have passed since she last stood here. He slides open the glass door, a faint smile crossing his face as he remembers their innocent youth before his world was torn apart. Telling her to wait, he steps deeper into the quiet house to gather essential supplies, preparing for the long, dangerous road ahead. Left alone in the heavy, suffocating silence of the room, So-yeon sits in the shadows, her mind racing with the chilling realization that their battle for survival has only just begun. So-yeon's outward confidence mask completely crumbles in the dark room, her internal panic swelling as she secretly admits to herself how utterly out of her depth she really is. These aren't impulsive madmen or simple street thugs. She realizes with a jolt of terror that she's dealing with a faceless army of killers who possess the terrifying backing to execute a target openly in broad daylight. The ruthless precision of their coordination points to something far more sinister, a massive, untouchable corporate syndicate operating completely above the law. She looks at the old childhood photograph of Isu's father, the memories of his bizarrely intense martial arts training and secrecy suddenly taking on a hauntingly logical meaning. He had isolated Isu his entire life and pushed him past human limits for a reason. He wasn't just raising a son, he was preparing him for a war that has finally arrived at their doorstep. The silence of the safe house is shattered as her phone rings, her heart leaping into her throat as she answers, only to hear the panicked, breathless voice of her junior officer on the line. Her blood runs ice cold as she listens to the horrifying update. The psychotic nurse assassin they had just handed over to police custody has somehow vanished without a trace. Her junior officer frantically explains that the moment he stepped away, their entire backup team was effortlessly incapacitated, leaving them completely vulnerable to a second wave. But before she can even process the betrayal, the glass door behind her shatters into a million lethal shards as a hulking figure violently erupts from the darkness. Shards of glass slice through the air as the monstrous bald giant locks his glowing, predatory eyes onto her, whispering a chilling confirmation of her doom. Framed against the shattered entrance, a nightmarish squad of elite syndicate assassins steps into the living room, completely blocking any hope of escape. Clinging to her phone, So-yeon struggles to breathe as the impossible reality sinks in. This hidden, secure safe house was compromised before they even arrived. Desperate and cornered, she screams into the receiver, ordering her junior to dispatch immediate backup to their coordinates before the line is permanently severed.
A gleaming knife suddenly flies through the darkness, brutally impaling her phone and pinning it to the counter as a mocking voice purrs from the shadows. The psychotic nurse steps forward with a twisted, red-eyed glare, her lethal bloodlust fully focused on carving up the detective who dared to stand in her way. Hearing the violent commotion, Isu bursts into the room with a look of sheer terror, calling out to her as the trap snaps shut around them. The towering bald giant steps forward with a mocking grin, thoroughly enjoying the pathetic helplessness of his young prey. Sweat pours down Isu's face as he realizes the sheer scale of the ambush. Not only did they survive, but they brought even more monstrous reinforcement. A refined, sharply dressed assassin with gold earrings casually steps forward, mocking his brute partner for failing to capture a mere teenager earlier. The elegant killer sneers, pointing out that dealing with an unenhanced normal kid should have been effortless, calling into question the brute's rank in the syndicate. Veins bulge on the giant's bald skull as the mockery pushes his temper over the edge, his pride deeply wounded by his previous defeat. Fueled by panic and rage, Isu screams at the monsters, demanding to know what they want and why his family is being hunted down like dogs. He is answered only by the lethal hiss of a thrown blade tearing through the air, forcing him to move on instinct. The deranged nurse lunges forward with terrifying speed, her combat-enhanced reflexes driving her knife straight toward his throat. Her eyes gleam with sadistic madness as she unleashes a flurry of rapid, razor-sharp strikes, desperate to paint the floor with his blood. The blade passes inches from his flesh, the sheer wind of the strike threatening to tear his defense apart as he barely evades. She relentlessly presses the offensive, her knife cutting through his jacket as he struggles to keep up with her inhuman speed. A sharp sting flashes across his cheek as a shallow cut wells with blood, the agonizing reality of her lethal skill setting in. Gritting his teeth, Isu desperately parries her next thrust, his hands locking onto her wrist in a brutal struggle to keep the blade away from his heart. But her strength is unnatural, her grip tightening as she prepares to plunge the knife downward with bone-crushing force. Before he can counter, she delivers a brutal, heavy kick straight to his midsection, sending him stumbling back in pain. Gasping for breath, Isu clutches his chest, his vision blurring as his body screams from the accumulation of physical punishment. He realizes with mounting dread that fighting against an armed, trained assassin is completely different from hand-to-hand combat, and his options are rapidly running out. A fleeting memory of his father flashes in his mind, recalling the strict, confusing rule that he was never to be taught the lethal arts of bladed weapons. He had never understood why his father deliberately left him defenseless against knives, but now that ignorance has become a fatal disadvantage. The nurse lunges again, her blade slicing through the air in a sweeping arc meant to sever his jugular. Isu groans in sheer desperation, forcing his exhausted limbs to move as he fights to stay one step ahead of her lethal dance. Summoning a final surge of adrenaline, he sidesteps her wild slash, exploiting a split-second opening in her aggressive stance. With a clean, powerful counterstrike, he drives his fist forward, the shockwave of his impact connecting heavily with her body. The assassin staggers backward with a sharp cry of shock, dark blood splattering her shoulder as she realizes her target is far more dangerous than she anticipated. Suddenly, a deafening gunshot echoes through the room, revealing So-yeon standing tall, her smoking service weapon raised with unwavering resolve. Stepping between her friend and the killers, she barks a lethal command, ordering the entire syndicate squad to drop their weapons and surrender. Her eyes burn with fierce determination as she warns them that she will not hesitate to pull the trigger again if they take another step. But her heroic stand is violently shattered as a second gunshot rings out, sending her crashing to the floor with a painful cry as blood blooms on her shoulder. From the shadows of the doorway, a calm, shadowy figure lowers a smoking firearm, revealing that the syndicate never intended to play by her rules. Clutching her bleeding wound, So-yeon gasps in pain, her heart sinking as the shooter coldly announces that the police were never their real targets. The bald giant looms over the fallen detective, declaring with chilling certainty that their only contract tonight is for the boy. Seeing his childhood protector bleeding and defenseless,
Isu looks up in absolute horror, his mind fracturing as his worst nightmare comes to life. The giant's massive fist crashes down with devastating superhuman force, completely shattering Isu's defenses and sending him crashing into the floor. Blood pouring from his mouth, Isu lies defeated on the floor, the giant's mocking words echoing in his fading consciousness as the syndicate prepares to drag him into the dark. The towering giant laughs maniacally, mocking Isu's absolute ignorance as nothing more than a helpless plaything for the shadowy syndicate rulers. Unleashing his full, terrifying strength, the brute throws a devastating punch, screaming for the boy to curse his parents for the nightmare they brought upon him. Isu reels back from the staggering force, his body breaking under the onslaught as agonizing pain flares through his veins. Crushed beneath the weight of his defeat, his mind fractures with confusion as he struggles to comprehend why his life was built on such dangerous secrets. A sudden flashback of his father's relentless, grueling training sessions rushes back, forcing him to question if every brutal lesson was preparing him for this exact moment. The haunting image of his father's cold, guarded face echoes in his mind, carrying the silent burden of a destiny Isu was never meant to escape. But amidst the overwhelming confusion, a sudden spark of survival ignites inside him, his resolve hardening as he refuses to stay down. His eyes flare with a sudden supernatural resolve, pushing past his physical limits as a primal instinct takes complete control of his broken body. Rejecting his tragic fate, Isu launches himself forward with a desperate, explosive surge of adrenaline, refusing to let his story end in this dark room. The colossal giant's smug grin completely vanishes, replaced by a sudden wave of primal panic as he realizes the boy's spirit is far from broken. With the precision of a trained killer, Isu drives a devastating counterpunch straight into the giant's jaw, channeling years of repressed combat instinct into one single blow. The impact shatters the silence of the room, a violent spray of blood erupting from the monster's mouth as his massive head snaps back. Standing tall amidst the chaos, Isu realizes with a sudden surge of confidence that he possessed the power to end this brutal struggle all along. The seemingly invincible syndicate giant crashes to the floor, completely unconscious and broken by the very kid he had brutally mocked moments before. Gasping for air, Isu stares at his trembling fists in disbelief, the terrifying realization of his own lethal potential sending a cold shiver down his spine. His brief moment of victory is instantly shattered as he spins around, a sudden panic gripping his chest as he remembers his bleeding protector. So-Yen desperately clutches her heavily bleeding hand, her pale face tight with agony, as she falsely reassures him that she can still endure the pain. The cold atmosphere grows even more suffocating as the elegant, gold-eared assassin steps over the fallen giant, casually noting how the boy's monstrous talent perfectly mirrors his legendary father. Enraged by the mention of his family, Isu screams in defiance, demanding the heartless killer keep his father's name out of his twisted mouth. The elegant killer merely offers a chilling, mocking smile, casually boasting that he was actually a massive admirer of his father's deadly legacy. Shedding his casual demeanor, the assassin slowly rolls up his sleeves, admitting he has grown utterly bored of watching Isu fight low-level street thugs. Veins bulge across his massive arms as he prepares to strike, declaring that despite his subordinates' embarrassing failure, he must step in to finish the job as their superior. Glaring back with absolute hatred, Isu steals his resolve, recognizing that this elegant monster is on an entirely different level than anyone he has ever faced. Raising his fists into a tight defensive guard, Isu fiercely declares that he will no longer play the victim in their sick, twisted game. Behind the elegant killer, his cold-eyed associate casually reminds him of their strict orders to capture the target alive, though the warning does little to dampen his sadistic excitement. Step by step, the menacing executive approaches, confidently mocking the boy by promising to go easy on him during his inevitable beatdown. The air violently erupts as the assassin lunges forward, his speed so blindingly fast that Isu can barely react as he tries to defend himself. Before he can even complete his defensive stance, a cold sweat breaks out on Isu's face as he realizes the monster's speed defies human limits.
The elegant killer's eyes glow with a deadly, predatory light as his fist tears through the air with unmatched superhuman force. The sheer wind of the attack threatens to tear Isu's guard apart, leaving him completely exposed to the lethal follow-up strike. A brutal, heavy blow connects solidly with Isu's side, the immense force shattering his defense and sending him flying across the room. The relentless assault continues without mercy as another crushing strike hits him head-on, completely overwhelming his desperate attempts to defend himself. Reeling from the savage beating, Isu's vision blurs as his body absorbs a terrifying amount of physical punishment. Falling heavily onto his hands and knees, the young warrior gasps for breath, his chest heaving as blood pools beneath him in the cold darkness. The elegant assassin looks down with a sadistic grin, deeply amused by the boy's freakish resilience, since even elite soldiers would have passed out from those blows. But his playful mood quickly sours as he declares that his time is running out, casually reaching back to accept a sleek, deadly katana from his waiting subordinate. He slowly unsheathes the gleaming blade, mockingly assuring the battered teenager that he has no intention of killing him just yet. Clutching his bleeding wounds, Isu looks up in horror as the killer explains that the syndicate's priority is bringing him back alive. The monster cruelly holds up his phone, revealing he is recording a live video of the agonizingly injured Soyeon to broadcast her impending death to his client. Isu's heart completely stops as the chilling reality of their absolute cruelty sinks in, his mind reeling in helpless disbelief. The assassin's face is cast in shadow as he mockingly notes that the brave detective is destined to bleed out from her wounds very soon anyway. Staring at the trembling, suffering Soyeon, the killer raises his blade, claiming he is merely performing a merciful act to put her out of her misery. Despair and panic completely consume Isu as he desperately screams for the monster to stop, his voice cracking with raw emotion. The gleaming katana slices down through the darkness with lethal, unyielding intent, aimed directly at the defenseless detective's neck. A violent spray of deep crimson blood erupts into the air, painting the floor as a sickening slash echoes through the silent room. But the blade did not strike Soyeon. Instead, Isu threw himself over her body, taking the massive, agonizing laceration directly across his own back. The elegant assassin's face warps with immense annoyance, deeply irritated that the boy refused to stay down and accept his merciful offer. Losing his temper entirely, the killer raises his blade once more, screaming that the weak have no right to choose their fate and should stay down quietly. Shielding the weeping detective beneath him, Isu grits his teeth through the agonizing pain, his blood-soaked clothes clinging to his mangled back as he faces his worst nightmare. The assassin prepares a final, brutal strike to completely sever the boy's limbs, leaving him with absolutely no hope of escaping the syndicate's clutches as the trap finally closes. The elegant assassin sneers that Isu brought this agonizing fate upon himself, raising his deadly katana for a final limb-severing strike. But before the cold steel can touch the boy, a spinning axe slices violently through the darkness, hurtling toward the killer with lethal speed. The flying weapon collides with the assassin's blade in a shower of sparks, instantly shattering his offensive momentum and forcing him backward. Stunned by the sudden, highly precise interference, the elegant killer recoils in absolute disbelief as he registers the weapon that blocked his path. From the shadows of the rooftop, a group of powerful, unrecognized figures emerges, coldly ordering the syndicate members to back off and return to their chairman's side. Their scarred, imposing leader commands an immediate retreat, his dominant aura instantly shifting the power dynamic in the tense area. The panicked syndicate thugs demand to know who these intruders are, frantically questioning if they are rival officers trespassing on their jurisdiction. The scarred man coldly clarifies that they are not the police, though they are intimately familiar with the syndicate's dirty operations. He fiercely accuses the Jin chairman's lapdogs of turning the entire city into a lawless, blood-soaked playground. Stepping forward with absolute confidence, he warns them that the actual authorities are already closing in, leaving them with no time left to play. Infuriated by the sudden roadblock, the elegant assassin completely loses his temper, raising his blade to slaughter these arrogant intruders.
but a pink-haired woman from the new faction swiftly intercepts him, her own blade effortlessly deflecting his strike with mocking ease.
The killer's eyes widen in shock as she playfully reminds him that her crew has absolutely no intention of losing a fight tonight.
Staring him down with a chilling, smug grin, she dares the humiliated syndicate executive to make his next move.
As distant police sirens begin to wail through the night air, the window for a clean getaway rapidly begins to slam shut.
The scarred leader directly pressures them, asking if they truly want to continue causing such a massive mess for their precious chairman to clean up. Recognizing the shifting tide, the cold-eyed associate warns his partner to act logically before they are completely overrun. Seething with absolute rage, the elegant killer curses the miserable interference that ripped his easy victory away. Utilizing the split-second distraction, Isu unleashes his remaining explosive surge of strength to drive a devastating, glowing-eyed punch straight into his tormentor's face.
The sudden, savage retaliation leaves the onlookers completely stunned by the boy's relentless, monstrous combat instincts.
The seemingly invincible assassin crashes violently to the ground, completely neutralized by the very child he had patronizingly mocked. Gasping and coughing up blood, Isu stands victorious but severely broken, his body finally reaching its absolute limit as the adrenaline fades. The remaining syndicate member fumes with frustration, stepping forward to curse the boy's reckless, defiant nature. Desperate to salvage the mission, he violently grabs the collapsing teenager, determined to drag him away by any means necessary. But the scarred leader's piercing, icy glare locks onto him, delivering a silent, lethal warning that freezes the thug in his tracks. Recognizing his complete disadvantage, the syndicate executive reluctantly yields, declaring their temporary retreat for the night.
Grabbing his unconscious, defeated superior, he slinks back into the dark shadows, forced to abandon the target they had fought so hard to capture. As the dust settles, a heavy silence descends over the blood-soaked scene, with the mysterious group surrounding the battered, exhausted boy. The scarred man looks down at the heavily bleeding teenager, directly identifying him as the son of the legendary Jin Seong-jun. He extends a surprising offer, promising to provide absolute protection if the boy agrees to come with them right now. Delirious and fading, Isu's mind reels as they explain he is in no condition to face the mysterious, powerful Jin chairman on his own. With suspicion burning through his pain, the battered young warrior demands to know why he should trust another group of armed strangers. The scarred leader merely offers a wry smile, admiring the boy's survival instinct and noting that caution is exactly what will keep him alive. He finally reveals his identity as an old, trusted friend of Isu's late father, urging him to quickly grasp the reality of his dire situation.
With the sirens growing deafeningly loud, the leader presses him for an immediate decision to avoid the incoming police swarm. Realizing he has no other choice, Isu finally relents, agreeing to follow them on the strict condition that they rescue his dying protector. As they evacuate the scene, a discarded smartphone is left glowing on the cold concrete, its active camera still transmitting everything to a distant viewer. Far away from the bloody streets, a massive corporate skyscraper stands tall in the neon-lit heart of the metropolis. Inside a luxurious penthouse, elite executives clink their champagne glasses, celebrating a ruthless rise to absolute power. They shower the arrogant, newly appointed corporate head with hollow praise, celebrating him as the youngest chairman in history. The young chairman merely sneers in response, callously complaining that his predecessor didn't die sooner to expedite his rise to the throne. A tense silence washes over the room as his sycophantic followers offer nervous laughter, deeply unsettled by his chilling lack of empathy. Casually raising his glass, the young tyrant dismisses the tension, inviting his guests to indulge in the lavish celebration of his victory. But the festivities are suddenly cut short as a subordinate announces that a live video feed from their field agents has just been received. Expecting a broadcast of Isu's capture, the chairman is shocked as the massive screen cuts to a red error warning, followed by a voice asking if he is the Jin chairman. Panic instantly erupts among the guests as the hijacked system coldly mocks their disappointment over the ruined broadcast. The screen reveals a dark silhouette, the hacker's voice declaring that the chairman's relentless hunt has finally exposed his position as the ultimate mastermind. The transmission flashes red warnings as the speaker promises that no amount of wealth or corporate power will protect the corrupt executive from retribution.
Veins bulge on the furious chairman's hand as he grips his glass, forced to listen to the boy's unwavering promise that he will not die easily. As the line goes completely dead, a terrifying vow of survival and vengeance echoes through the penthouse, signaling that the hunter has officially become the hunted. The hijacked video feed glimmers with red malice as Isu's voice cold-bloodedly promises the newly appointed chairman a gruesome, unstoppable revenge. From the dark, glitched screen, a lone, glowing red eye glares with absolute hatred, daring the young corporate tyrant to watch his inevitable downfall unfold. Meanwhile, far from the penthouse, Isu lies unconscious as a secret factions crew fiercely disputes his presence, furious that they've been dragged into a highly dangerous war. The bickering intensifies over the boy's battered body, with some demanding to know why their captain brought him here without consulting them first. Fed up with the endless, loud arguments, the hot-headed female fighter storms out of the room, leaving her comrades to deal with the trouble on their own. But as she glances back with a sharp, mocking grin, her expression suddenly freezes as she notices a subtle change behind her. Turning back around in sheer surprise, she realizes that the heavily battered teenager has finally opened his eyes, staring directly back at them. The resident surgeon crosses his arms, sternly warning the boy not to overexert himself now that his near-fatal wounds have miraculously been patched up. Confused and completely disoriented, Isu sits up in the unfamiliar medical bay, desperately trying to comprehend where he has been taken. He glares at the unrecognized faces surrounding his bed, demanding to know who they are and what their true intentions are with him. The scarred leader steps forward, calmly revealing that the corporate syndicate's ruthless new chairman has placed a massive target on his back, and that keeping him alive was his late father's final wish. Hearing the name of his family's greatest tormentor, Isu tightly clutches the bedsheets, a wave of familiar, white-hot fury surging through his veins. He fiercely accuses the mysterious crew of cowardice, questioning why these self-proclaimed allies did absolutely nothing when his father was brutally murdered. The scarred man holds his ground, explaining that Isu's father knew exactly what he was doing and was fully prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. He reveals that the legendary warrior intentionally drew the syndicate's undivided attention, throwing away his own life to buy his precious son a chance to survive. Softening his tone, the leader admits his deep, lifelong respect for the boy's father, expressing his sincere remorse over the tragic loss. Seizing the quiet moment, he extends a formal invitation, offering the young warrior a place among their covert ranks. He explains that their sole purpose is to dismantle and control the dangerous shadow syndicates that have corrupted the city. Before the leader can finish painting a picture of righteous vengeance, Isu cuts him off with a flat, cold refusal. Swinging his feet onto the cold floor, the proud boy admits he cannot simply trust armed strangers, declaring that he has no time to waste on their grand plans for revenge. He fiercely pulls on his mended jacket, determined to handle his own chaotic life and face his enemies on his own terms. Offering a brief, curt thank you for saving his life, Isu walks out the door, leaving the stunned crew deeply irritated by his prideful defiance. The hot-tempered crew members yell after him in frustration, insulted that he dismissed their goodwill and their hard work so easily. Soon, a plastic card slides through a checkout machine, finalizing a cheap purchase of basic painkillers at a local pharmacy. With the pharmacist's hollow farewell echoing behind him, the exhausted boy steps out into the blinding daylight, completely drained of energy. Looking out over the towering buildings, the reality of his grim, isolated situation begins to settle heavily over his shoulders. Clutching the meager bag of medicine, Isu mutters that these basic pills will have to suffice for his recovery. He winces in sudden pain, knowing that as a wanted fugitive, stepping foot into a real hospital would mean instant capture. Wandering down the quiet, desolate alleys, he admits to himself that despite his dramatic exit, he has absolutely no destination. The crushing weight of his isolation hits him hard, leaving him utterly lost in a city that actively wants him dead. But as he looks up at his surroundings, a strange, creeping sense of familiarity washes over his face. Staring out at the massive, chaotic sprawl of cramped buildings, he realizes he has entered the infamous slums of Paesudong. Standing at the edge of the gritty neighborhood, he gazes at the distant, glittering skyline of Seoul, feeling completely detached from the world of the wealthy. A sudden, vivid memory of his father's voice echoes through his mind, bringing back a warning from his childhood. In a faded memory, a young Isu had walked alongside his towering father, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. His father had pointed out toward the horizon, introducing him to the dark, untouchable reputation of the slum district. He had explained that Paesudong was a lawless landfill where all kinds of horrific crimes were committed and permanently buried. The young boy had shuddered in terror, expressing his deep fear of ever getting lost in such a horrific place. Looking back at his son with a warm yet solemn gaze, the seasoned warrior had prepared him for the harsh realities of the world. Back in the brutal present, a group of armed thugs gathers in an alley, eagerly tracking a massive corporate bounty that just popped up on their screens. Hiding behind a stone wall, Isu's blood runs cold as he overhears them spreading out to search every nook and cranny of the neighborhood for him. He grits his teeth in disbelief, horrified that a powerful corporation has successfully turned the entire city's underworld into his personal hunters. Desperate to escape, Isu turns to run, only to be ambushed by a wild-eyed brute swinging a lethal, heavy axe straight at his head. The deadly weapon slices violently through the air with terrifying force, aiming to end the boy's flight once and for all. Isu barely ducks out of the way, the razor-sharp edge tearing his plastic bag and sending his precious medicine spilling onto the dirty concrete. A heavy boot stomps down hard, instantly crushing any hope of a quiet, peaceful escape. The ambushers scream in triumph, alerting the entire street to the fugitive's exact location as Isu bolts down the narrow alleyway. A horde of greedy bounty hunters floods the streets, chasing after the exhausted teenager like a pack of starved wolves. Panting heavily and fighting through the agonizing pain of his healing wounds, Isu pushes his broken body to the absolute limit. He looks up at the surrounding windows, only to find the local residents watching his desperate struggle with cold, unbothered eyes, realizing too late that in this lawless hellscape, no one is coming to save him. The deafening roar of a citywide manhunt echoes through the cramped streets as coordinates are frantically barked over the airwaves, commanding the horde to seal off every possible escape route. Vaulting over a brick barrier with a desperate leap, the exhausted teenager strains to put distance between himself and his pursuers, his heart hammering violently against his ribs. But his momentum grinds to a sudden agonizing halt as his eyes widen in pure shock, realizing too late that his path has led him into a trap. He stares down the narrow, shadowed corridor, only to find a towering, insurmountable brick wall topped with iron spikes, leaving him utterly cornered. Panic claws at his throat as he looks at his trembling hands, a terrifying question echoing in his mind. In this battered state, can he actually survive a direct fight? But as the distant shouts grow louder, he grits his teeth, knowing that hesitation means death and that his only choice is to unleash his inner beast. Suddenly, a sharp, echoing noise cuts through the alley behind him, causing him to whip his head around in sheer panic. Out of the shadows, a group of armed thugs bursts into the alleyway with bloodthirsty grins, roaring that his run ends here. Yet as they storm the dead end with weapons raised, they stop dead in their tracks, staring in utter disbelief at an empty, silent alleyway. Frantic confusion erupts among the hunters as they aggressively bicker, unable to comprehend how their high-value target could have vanished into thin air. Just inches away, crouched beneath the low windowsill of a dark building, Isu frantically holds his breath, silently pleading with the small child beside him to keep quiet. The young boy tilts his head, listening intently to the heavy thud of footsteps fading away into the distance as the danger barely passes them by. Letting out a shaky, exhausted breath, Isu sinks back against the wall, his battered muscles trembling from the overwhelming surge of adrenaline. Looking down at his unexpected savior, he offers a soft, breathless thank you, deeply relieved that this innocent child chose to help him in his darkest hour. Without a single word, the mysterious boy turns around and begins pushing aside heavy wooden crates, revealing a hidden compartment in the corner of the room. Watching the silent kid's strange actions, Isu quietly asks if he is unable to speak, his curiosity piqued by the child's eerie, calm demeanor.
But before he can get an answer, a cold sweat breaks across his forehead as the heavy vibration of approaching footsteps begins to rattle the floorboards. The unmistakable sound of harsh voices echoes right outside the door, signaling that the search party has already breached the building. Terror grips Ice's chest as he realizes his pursuers are right on the other side of the thin wooden door, leaving him with absolutely no time to run. Sensing the immediate danger, the silent child urgently points toward a dark, circular ventilation hatch hidden beneath the desk, gesturing for him to climb inside. With no other choice, Isu slides headfirst into the narrow, pitch-black chute, sliding down into the unknown as the footsteps pound right outside. Tumbling out of the narrow shaft, he crashes hard onto the floor, quickly pushing himself up only to freeze at the sight of two figures standing in the dimly lit room. As his eyes adjust to the warm light, a wave of profound shock washes over his face when he recognizes his surroundings. He has crawled straight into a police station. His blood runs cold as several heavily armed officers step out of the shadows, their cold, calculating glares confirming that he has walked right into a hornet's nest. Standing in the center of the trap is the very child who just guided him here, surrounded by corrupt cops who look down at the battered fugitive with predatory satisfaction. The young boy stares back with a chilling, vacant expression, revealing that his apparent kindness was nothing more than a calculated lure to secure a massive reward. Smiling triumphantly, the lead officer raises his smartphone, mockingly declaring that they've just hit the ultimate jackpot. The screen glows with a high-priority corporate bounty issued by Choundo, displaying Aisu's face alongside a promise of life-changing wealth for his immediate capture. Clenching his fist against the floor until his knuckles turn white, a bitter, agonizing realization washes over the betrayed teenager. Looking down in deep despair, he finally accepts the brutal truth of his reality. In this corrupted city, he is nothing more than prey to be hunted by everyone. But as the shadow of despair threatens to consume him, a white-hot spark of primal rage ignites in his chest, his eyes flashing with a terrifying resolve. The corrupt officers exchange arrogant grins, callously advising each other to rough the boy up just enough to keep him from fighting back before delivering him to the syndicate. As a heavy boot takes a slow, confident step forward to claim the prize, the air in the room suddenly grows suffocatingly tense. The arrogant smirk instantly vanishes from the lead officer's face, replaced by sudden alarm as he senses a lethal shift in the boy's posture. With a feral roar, Aisu lunges forward like a coiled spring, throwing his entire broken body into a desperate, explosive struggle for survival. Stunned by the kid's sheer audacity, the cop screams in fury, raising his fist to crush the reckless teenager once and for all. But Isu's speed is blinding. He crashes into the officer's chest with the force of a battering ram, shattering his defenses in a split second. Fueled by pure adrenaline and the primal fear of death, he tackles the corrupt cop backward, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, unyielding killer instinct. The two bodies collide violently, tumbling downward in a chaotic, bone-shattering heap of limbs and fury. A brutal strike connects with sickening force, sending a spray of dark blood erupting from the officer's mouth as he crashes hard against the stone steps. Scrambling away from the fallen cop, Aisu sprints into a nearby room, desperately slamming the heavy metal door shut behind him. Outside, the remaining officer slams his fists against the barricade in a wild rage, screaming at the top of his lungs for the boy to open the door. Throwing his entire weight against the handle, Isu holds the lock tight, his teeth bared as he fights to keep the enraged hunters at bay. The heavy wood trembles violently under a barrage of furious blows, the desperate screams of his enemies promising a slow, agonizing death once they breach his final defense. Finally sliding down to the cold floor, the exhausted teenager gasps for air, his body trembling as the relentless pounding on the door echoes through his skull. Down on the stairwell, the tackled officer lies completely motionless in a pool of dark blood, his lifeless eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Clutching his head in a state of overwhelming panic and grief, Aisu silently begs his deceased father for guidance, utterly lost in a world that wants him dead. Outside the station, a corrupt officer frantically waves his flashlight into the darkness of the night, calling out to the arriving syndicate thugs that they have the target cornered. A ruthless gang of armed reinforcements arrives at the scene, brandishing heavy axes and blunt weapons as they eagerly prepare to break down the final barrier.
Suddenly, a massive, deafening blast shatters the quiet night, signaling that his desperate sanctuary has finally been breached and the final fight for his life has begun. The newly arrived reinforcements charge into the police station stairwell, shouting for their leader to report in, completely unaware of the carnage that just transpired. Their bloodthirsty grins instantly freeze as their flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the lifeless body of their chief slumped on the stairs in a pool of fresh blood. But instead of mourning, a cold, sickening amusement washes over them as they mock their dead leader for his greed, realizing the massive bounty is now theirs for the taking. Greed consumes the gang as the lead thug spits on his corpse, screaming that he'll claim every cent of the reward himself, throwing his allies into a state of sheer bloodlust. Listening from behind the corner, Isu's stomach churns at their absolute lack of humanity, his heart racing as they aggressively order a complete sweep of the building to hunt him down. Cornered in the dark, the exhausted teenager grits his teeth, his mind frantically searching for a way to survive against a horde of cold-blooded beasts who feel absolutely no remorse. Suddenly, the thunderous stomp of approaching footsteps echoes from the lower floor, prompting the bloodthirsty hunters to surge forward with weapons raised. A rabid brute storms the landing, brandishing a massive knife and roaring for the fugitive to come down and face his execution. But his triumphant roar turns into a gasp of pure horror as he looks up, realizing too late that his prey is already striking back. With a violent shove, a heavy metal cabinet is sent hurtling down the narrow stairwell, tumbling with bone-crushing momentum. Pouring every ounce of his remaining strength into the barricade, Ishu grits his teeth, desperate to crush the front line of his pursuers in one decisive blow. Another thug aggressively pushes past his fallen comrade, screaming in a rabid frenzy that the bounty is his and his alone as he charges up the steps. Forcing his battered legs to move, Isu bursts out onto the open cold rooftop, desperately scanning the night for a way out. He lunges for a rusty door handle, his fingers desperately clawing at the metal in a frantic bid to find a safe escape route. But a violent hand rips into his jacket from behind, a maniacal grin stretching across his pursuer's face as he claims ultimate victory. The thug's boasting is cut short as a sickening splash of crimson erupts across his face, his eyes widening in sudden, agonizing betrayal. A massive, blood-dripping axe slices through his back, swung by an ally who scoffs at his foolishness for trying to steal the bounty. Turning his manic gaze to Isu, the brute raises the heavy weapon, smiling sadistically as he warns the boy that he's taking his arm next. The lethal axe cuts violently through the air, aimed directly at the boy's chest with terrifying, murderous intent. Isu throws himself to the dirty floor just in time, the heavy blade smashing into the concrete with a shower of dangerous sparks. Scrambling back to his feet, the young fugitive glares at his relentless executioner, a primal survival instinct flaring up in his chest. From the shadows of the rooftop, cold laughter echoes as the rest of the pack surrounds him, relishing his helpless struggle. The long-haired thug smiles wickedly at the bleeding corpse of his partner, callously muttering that it is simply one less mouth to feed. In this moment of absolute darkness, a heavy, painful memory flashes through Isu's mind, his father's voice, full of regret for not being able to protect him. He remembers the grim warning that death was always coming, and that the only choice in this cruel world was to face it with fists clenched. Back on the rooftop, the heavy silence of the night is broken by the thug's mocking taunts, wondering why the terrified teenager has suddenly stopped fighting. The lead hunter sneers, telling him to accept the brutal reality that a targeted runner will only face a slow, agonizing death. He coldly reminds the boy that even if he manages to escape today, everyone he loves will be hunted down and slaughtered by the corporate syndicate. Staring out at the towering, neon-lit skyscrapers of the corrupted city, Isu calmly replies that he has already lost everything and that he finally understands his true purpose. The hunters chuckle mockingly at his words, spitting that his realization has come far too late to save his life. Gripping the heavy metal pipe in his hands until his knuckles turn white, Isu remembers the brutal, relentless training his father put him through. A terrifying clarity washes over him as he realizes his father never wanted him to live a quiet life. He was training a weapon to survive the end of the world. The thug's grins quickly fade as the air grows suffocatingly tense, the boy's posture shifting into that of a cold-blooded killer. Fueled by sudden panic, the lead thug screeches for the gang to charge, desperate to crush the boy before he can unleash his fury. Isu lunges forward like a shadow, his weapon slicing through the air with explosive, blinding speed.
He weaves through a barrage of heavy swings, his reflexes sharp as a razor as he exploits the brute's clumsy stance. With a sickening thud, his strike connects, sending a violent spray of dark blood into the cold night air as the first hunter collapses. Before they can react, another mercenary lunges forward with a massive blade, screaming in a desperate attempt to end the fight. Parrying the blow effortlessly, Isu glares into his attacker's eyes, asking if they truly believe they were any different from the monsters they serve. The desperate brute swings wildly, screaming that the boy will die a dog's death no matter where he tries to run.
Their weapons clash in a violent storm of sparks, the impact rattling through the teenager's healing bones.
But the thug's confidence turns to pure terror as he feels the impossible, monstrous strength surging through the boy's arms.
Staring down the trembling mercenary, Isu's eyes glow with a cold, terrifying resolve, his power completely eclipsing the thug's expectations.
With a brutal, decisive sweep, he breaks the thug's defense, his weapon cutting deep as a final spray of blood paints the concrete.
The last remaining hunter takes a terrified step back, gasping in horror at the mountain of bloodied corpses littering the rooftop.
Suddenly, a sharp blade pierces cleanly through his throat from behind, choking his final scream into a bloody gargle.
Standing over the fresh corpse is a deadly, familiar figure, a cold smile playing on her lips as she comments on his combat skills.
She casually steps forward, spinning her bloody knife as she mockingly remarks that the apple truly doesn't fall far from the tree. Gritting his teeth against the exhaustion, Isu demands to know how long she has been tailing him from the shadows. With a sharp, piercing gaze, she informs him that she has been watching his every move under the captain's orders, coldly declaring that his run ends here and it is time to go back.
Staring down at his trembling hands, the young runner asks himself the only question that matters anymore: if there is any way left for him to become strong enough to survive this hell.
Looking down at the blood-spattered rooftop, a cold realization washes over him, exposing just how blind and ignorant he had been to the true cruelty of the world around him. He knows there is no turning back now. To survive, he must find a way to completely destroy Cheongdo, the monstrous corporate syndicate that ruined his life.
Meanwhile, across the bustling, sunlit corporate district, a deceptive peace masks the rot beneath, as voices of comfort try to lull the wounded into a false sense of security.
Inside the precinct, the head of the division barks orders over the phone, determined to hunt down the scum who dared to attack one of their own detectives, promising to leave no stone unturned.
Clutching the phone in her hospital bed, the recovering officer desperately protests her forced rest, her loyalty driving her to get back into the fight as soon as she can stand. But the chief dismisses her concerns, urging her to shut out the chaos and focus on healing, completely unaware of the shadow looming directly behind him.
As the line abruptly goes dead, the heavy silence of the hospital room returns, leaving her isolated with her mounting dread and a gut feeling that something has gone terribly wrong. Letting out a heavy, anxious sigh, she stares blankly at her screen, the weight of her helplessness crushing her chest as the shadows outside lengthen. Her trembling finger hovers over a single contact name, Jin Isu, silently begging to know where the desperate teenager has vanished to in this unforgiving city.
Suddenly, a sickening news alert shatters the quiet, broadcasting a gruesome report of officers brutally slaughtered in the lawless district of Paesudong.
Back at headquarters, the younger officer shows his chief the horrific casualty report, highlighting that 5 autonomous police officers were ruthlessly executed with heavy weaponry. But the chief aggressively snatches the tablet, coldly declaring that they will not waste a single resource on a neighborhood controlled by dirty, gang-affiliated autonomous cops. Ordering the case to be dumped onto another team or buried entirely, the chief leaves his subordinates stunned by the blatant corruption and apathy of their own department. Far from the reach of the corrupt police, a mysterious ally turns to Isu under the cover of night, repeating his desperate goal with a sharp, calculating glint in her eyes. A knowing smile creeps onto her face as she confirms that bringing down the tyrannical corporate giant is the very reason this underground rebel group was formed.
She admits her utter disdain for training unproven rookies, but makes it clear she will follow the captain's orders to guide him through the coming storm.
Locking her gaze onto the boy, she demands confirmation of his identity, prompting a tense, resolute nod from the exhausted fugitive. Extending her hand in a silent pact, she introduces herself as Yu Ji-min, initiating a dangerous alliance forged in blood and shared vengeance. Grasping the reality of his situation, Isu declares with fierce resolve that if it means destroying Chungdo and Chairman Jin, he is willing to do whatever it takes. From the shadows of the secret bunker, the battle-scarred leader of the resistance observes the boy silently, measuring the depth of his conviction. He finally speaks, revealing a shocking truth that both he and Isu's father were once elite agents for Chungdo, with his father revered as a legendary warrior. He explains how the blood of innocent victims eventually forced them to rebel against their corporate masters, turning them into targets of the very empire they built. They have been waging a shadow war ever since, carrying on a legacy of bloody rebellion that has now passed directly to Isu. The scarred leader warns Isu that survival demands instant adaptation, as the brutal reality of their war leaves absolutely no room to protect a weak link. Sweat dripping down his brow, the young fugitive stares back without flinching, declaring that his mind and body are fully prepared for the meat grinder ahead. Satisfied with his resolve, the scarred veteran introduces himself as Baek Gyeon, alongside Jimin, welcoming the boy into their tight-knit circle of killers. The rest of the deadly crew chimes in, introducing the eager powerhouse Hwang Jun and the dangerously playful Go Hana, both sizing up their newest recruit. Suddenly, their resident tech specialist interrupts the introductions, his eyes locked onto a rapidly updating status screen on his tablet. He warns that the countdown has begun, with a crucial syndicate convoy set to move in less than 30 minutes, leaving no time to waste. Baekhyun immediately shifts into commander mode, ordering the squad to disperse and take up their designated strike positions across the target zone. He commands Isu to stay close to him, giving the boy his very first taste of a live, high-stakes military ambush. Baekhyun lays out the massive strategic map, explaining how the corporate Leviathan already controls 10 major districts and aggressively plans to consume the remaining territories. Their ultimate goal is not just corporate domination, but to dismantle the government entirely and establish Chungdo as its own sovereign nation. He reveals that Isu's father was the only reason the previous chairman halted their bloody expansion, but the new, ruthless chairman is hell-bent on realizing that dark empire. To build their nation, they orchestrate artificial chaos to devalue the remaining districts, buying them up for pennies before rebuilding them as corporate strongholds. Their tactical briefing is cut short as the radio crackles to life, confirming that the syndicate's heavy transport vehicle has just entered the kill zone. Snatching a heavy black weapon case, Baekhyun flings it over to Isu, initiating him into his legacy with a blunt, no-nonsense warning to hold on tight. He tells the boy that the heavy case contains his deceased father's personal combat gear, a legendary arsenal that he must now master to survive the slaughter. Peering over the edge of the rooftop, Baekhyun tells him to watch closely, to learn exactly how their enemies operate when executing their ruthless missions. Below them, the sleek, armored syndicate van rolls quietly through the neon-lit streets, heading straight toward its unsuspecting target. The blinding headlights of the transport pierce the darkness, the low rumble of its engines signaling the imminent start of a bloodbath. Inside the vehicle, a scarred thug voices his sudden panic, demanding to know why their boss has ordered them to mess with this specific territory. He argues with his partner, furious that the syndicate is invading their local turf and threatening the lucrative protection racket they worked so hard to establish. But the driver only grins sadistically, boasting that terrorizing the locals is simply easy money, comparing the slaughter of civilians to butchering helpless cattle. He sharply warns his partner to shut his mouth and follow orders, reminding him that curiosity in their line of work is a quick way to get decapitated. With a screech of tires, the heavy van pulls up directly outside a dimly lit bar, the cold air filling with the silent promise of violence. Without warning, a massive combat-booted foot kicks the heavy wooden entrance completely off its hinges, shattering the quiet night with a violent explosion of wood and glass. Storming through the wreckage, the lead brute sneers at the terrified crowd, loudly demanding to know which one of them is their target, Kim Sang-bong. As the armed thugs flood the room, the color drains from the patrons' faces, and the heavy atmosphere instantly freezes with the terrifying realization that none of them may walk out of this bar alive. A brave young bartender refuses to be intimidated by the invading thugs, boldly declaring himself as the son of the target they are hunting. The lead thug sneers at the revelation, his eyes narrowing as he demands to know the exact whereabouts of the building's owner. Tension in the room spikes to a suffocating level as both men slam their hands onto the bar counter, initiating a silent, deadly battle of wills. Gritting his teeth against the mounting threat, the young man stands his ground, coldly warning the intruders that his father is not here and they need to leave immediately. The brutal mercenary has no patience for defiance, violently grabbing the boy's head and smashing it into the hard wood with a bone-shattering impact. Laughing maniacally at the bloodshed, the scarred leader barks orders to his crew to completely tear the establishment apart. The thugs immediately descend on the bar like wild beasts, shattering bottles and sending terrified patrons screaming for their lives. Anyone who dares to look their way is met with ruthless, unprovoked violence as the syndicate asserts its absolute, terrifying dominance. Driven out by the agonizing screams of his son, the battered owner finally crawls out from hiding, desperately begging the monsters to stop the slaughter. The lead thug grins sadistically, lifting the bloody youth by his hair to show the old man exactly what happens to those who resist. Outside, a terrified customer tries to slip away into the dark alley, completely unaware of the deadly lookouts guarding the perimeter. Spotting the runner, a blonde thug sneers in amusement, preparing to hunt down his prey with sadistic pleasure. Suddenly, a calm, mocking voice echoes through the cold night, asking if they belong to the notorious syndicate encroaching on this turf. Stepping out of the shadows, Huang Jun casually confronts the heavily armed guards, making it clear he is here to crash their party. The thugs are stunned by his sheer audacity, drawing their weapons as they prepare to paint the alley with his blood. But Jun merely sighs in mock disappointment, entirely unfazed by their aggressive posturing as he prepares to make his move. He casually remarks on their foul language, tossing a small pebble into the air with a playful grin that masks his lethal intent. Before the guard can even blink, Jun flicks the stone with the force of a bullet, a blinding shockwave tearing through the darkness. The blonde thug collapses instantly, clutching his shattered forehead as a sudden, overwhelming force drops him to the concrete. Step by step, Jun advances with a cold smirk, warning them that they should have spoken more politely if they wanted to survive. The remaining driver freezes in absolute terror, realizing too late that they're dealing with an entirely different breed of killer. Before he can even raise his weapon, a blinding silver flash cleanly severs his companion's head, unleashing a horrific spray of crimson. Out of the shadows leaps Yu Ji-min, her eyes burning with a lethal light as her dual blades find their next target with terrifying speed. She lands gracefully among the fresh corpses, spinning her blood-soaked knives with a sadistic smile as she calls their demise simple karma. Panic erupts throughout the neon-lit district as fleeing civilians scream in horror, realizing a savage, undeclared gang war has just claimed the streets. Backed into a corner, the surviving street thugs scream in desperation, demanding to know who has dared to cross the powerful Gyeoksepe gang. A terrified thug points a trembling finger, boasting that they are the undisputed kings of this territory in a desperate bid to save his own skin. Jimin only scoffs at his pathetic bravado, her expression hardening as she prepares to show them what true monsters look like. The thug violently stomps his foot, warning that their supreme bosses will butcher everyone involved the moment they hear of this assault. But his desperate warning is brutally cut short as Jun leaps from above, raising his massive tactical axe to deliver a crushing final blow. Inside the ruined bar, the beaten owner gasps for air, choking on his own blood as the cold reality of his hopelessness sinks in. The smug gang leader sits back comfortably, mockingly advising the old man that a simple signature on the deed would spare his life. Weeping in agonizing pain, the owner refuses to yield, spitting blood as he protests that this building represents his entire life's work. The leader's playful demeanor vanishes instantly, replaced by a cold, murderous glare, as he realizes the old man still harbors a spark of defiance. He signals his ruthless executioner, who raises a heavy metal rod to beat the stubborn owner into permanent silence. But before the killing blow can land, a heavy, commanding voice shatters the tense silence of the room, questioning how low these street gangs have fallen. Standing firmly at the shattered entrance is Bae-gon, flanked by his elite squad, calmly demanding to be taken straight to their boss. The gang leader leaps to his feet in a furious rage, demanding to know what suicidal fool has dared to barge onto his personal turf.
The surrounding thugs exchange panicked glances, a sudden, heavy dread washing over them as they sense the immense power radiating from the intruders. Behind the commander, Gohana steps forward with a dangerously playful grin, eagerly asking for permission to handle the garbage. She slowly draws a gleaming katana from its sheath, her eyes reflecting the cold steel as she prepares to unleash absolute carnage. Enraged by her condescending attitude, the thugs charge forward with axes and knives, screaming in primitive fury. In a blur of blinding, high-speed slashes, Hana dances through the crowd, painting the red walls with a spectacular spray of blood. Her companion watches the slaughter with wide eyes, completely stunned by her terrifying ability to dismantle their defense in a single breath. She casually pauses, examining her sword with a pout as she complains that the cutting edge didn't feel as sharp as she expected. The remaining thugs shake violently, sweat pouring down their pale faces as they realize they are utterly outmatched. Hana turns her glowing, bloodthirsty gaze toward them, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper as she asks if they really want to test her again. She towers over the trembling survivors, her suffocating presence completely crushing their will to fight as she demands if they finally understand the situation. The terrified brute can only stammer in absolute shock, his mind breaking as he stares into the eyes of a cold-blooded killer. With one final merciless swing, she unleashes a devastating crescent of energy, slicing through the remaining resistance and leaving nothing but severed limbs and silence in her wake. The sole surviving gang leader screams in sheer terror, his arrogant composure instantly shattered by Gohana's blood-chilling display of power. Towering over him with a cold, predatory smile, Hana levels her blade, demanding to know if he is indeed the highest-ranking officer left alive in this slaughterhouse. Sweat pours down his pale face as he stammers in absolute panic, unable to find his words while staring death directly in the eye. Suddenly, a faint, high-frequency static hum sizzles from a tiny implant embedded just beneath the skin of his trembling neck. With a desperate, final cry of horror, the thug's eyes roll back as a lethal, sizzling poison erupts from his throat, his syndicate bosses executing him from afar. Hana's triumphant smile vanishes instantly, replaced by sheer shock as she realizes her primary source of information has just been ruthlessly silenced right before her eyes. Meanwhile, across the bustling, sunlit city, a sleek corporate vehicle glides through the towering skyscrapers of the powerful Chondo Group. Inside the autonomous car, the dashboard GPS quietly tracks their path as a disgruntled voice seethes over the sudden change in their corporate leadership. Two high-ranking executives in crisp business suits exchange bitter complaints, furious that a young, untested heir has suddenly inherited the chairman's seat. The senior director snarls in frustration, completely fed up with the idealistic new chairman's constant interference in their established under-the-table business operations. Seizing the opportunity, his partner leans in with a sinister grin, suggesting they leak the highly classified secrets of their massive expansion project to hostile politicians and the press. As they finalize their treasonous plan, they remain completely oblivious to the fact that their entire conversation is being live-streamed through an active wiretap. In a dark, high-tech surveillance room, a cold figure stands in silence, listening to every single word of the betrayal play out on his terminal screens. The listener adjusts his receiver, his expression blank as he prepares to report this corporate insubordination directly to the very top of the food chain. With a swift tap of his earpiece, he quietly confirms the executive's treachery to the young, ruthless chairman himself. Back at the squad's medical facility, the grim reality of the bar raid is laid bare on an autopsy table as the team examines the silenced gang leader. The resident surgeon carefully holds up a tiny, high-tech capsule extracted from the dead man's tooth, revealing it to be a highly concentrated, remote-activated poison. Pointing to the subdermal node on the corpse's neck, the doctor explains that the device doubled as both a live transmitter and a remote kill switch. Squad members trade dark looks, realizing the syndicate's bosses were listening to the entire interrogation in real time, executing their own man the second he hesitated. Baggun narrows his eyes, deducing that the newly formed Juksapa gang is merely a disposable pawn funded by the massive corporate backing of the Chongdo Group. Sensing an imminent strike, the commander sharply orders Yuji men to take the rookie, Isu, and cover the Sinshan district, where Juksapa is predicted to strike next. Jimin instantly protests the decision, but Baekhyun firmly cuts her off, stating that raw numbers won't win this war and she must teach the boy how to secure a high-value target.
Leaving them with a smirk and a playful warning to enjoy their date, the commander leads the rest of the elite squad out to strike the enemy from multiple fronts.
Frustrated and overwhelmed by the immense pressure of babysitting a green recruit, Jimin groans in exhaustion while Isu watches her in silent apprehension.
The next afternoon, the blazing sun beats down on the decaying, desolate streets of Sinchon, where blood-red banners scream of desperate resistance against forced eviction. Looking around the abandoned, run-down buildings, a nervous Isu quietly asks where exactly they have set up their stakeout. Jimin grimly explains that this is the final stronghold of the displaced locals, whom Changdo has been systematically terrorizing by cutting off their water, power, and basic infrastructure.
She reveals that the greedy corporation has refused to pay any compensation, choosing instead to make the entire area unlivable to break the residents' spirits.
Her eyes harden as she delivers the brutal truth. Today, the ruthless Joksapa syndicate is sending in their heavy hitters to permanently wipe out the remaining evictees. Horrified by the sheer cruelty of the plan, Isu's blood runs hot with anger, but Jimin sharply reminds him that their sole objective is to capture the enemy executive, not play hero. She warns him to lock away his pity, reminding him that a single emotional slip-up will compromise the entire operation before the violence even begins. As the sun begins to set, casting a deep crimson glow over the barricades, a handful of terrified but determined locals arm themselves with whatever pipes and bats they can find. Suddenly, one of the lookout defenders freezes in pure shock, his eyes whitening as a heavy, synchronized rumble echoes from the mouth of the alley. The steady, terrifying rhythm of heavy combat boots scraping against the asphalt signals the arrival of the corporate-funded execution squad. With bloodthirsty grins, a massive wave of hired thugs floods the streets, brandishing iron bars and axes as they roar orders to drag everyone out of their homes. Refusing to go down without a fight, the desperate defenders swing wildly, determined to protect their neighborhood even if it costs them their lives. A sudden, violent explosion of fire shatters the defense as a Molotov cocktail erupts, engulfing a screaming thug in a blinding wall of flame. Amidst the horrific screams and spreading chaos, two towering syndicate enforcers stride forward casually, completely unfazed as they joke about grabbing dinner after the slaughter. From her hidden vantage point, Jimin points out a smug, red-haired thug walking casually behind the vanguard, identifying him as the key executive they need to extract. Peering through the shadows of the narrow alleyway, Isu locks his gaze onto the target, waiting for the perfect opportunity to make their move. Jimin whispers their tactical plan, instructing him to wait for her to neutralize the guards before he sweeps in to snatch the executive. But before they can coordinate, a heart-wrenching scream echoes nearby as a terrified mother desperately shields her crying child from the advancing mob. A ruthless thug corners them with a sadistic sneer, raising a heavy wooden bat over his head to deliver a lethal, unprovoked blow to the helpless woman. Gritting her teeth, Jimin draws her combat knife, muttering that the syndicate has officially crossed the line as she prepares to intervene from a distance. But before she can throw her blade, her eyes widen in sudden shock as a shadow storms past her position. Ignoring every single order she gave him, Isu throws himself into the fray, intercepting the heavy wooden bat with his bare arm in a brutal, bone-jarring clash. A split-second flashback recalls the briefing they had just moments earlier, where Jimin had carefully laid out their incredibly simple extraction plan. She had explicitly warned him to let her draw the guards' attention so they could isolate the executive and execute a clean, silent getaway. She had stared deep into his eyes, demanding his absolute word that he would under no circumstances get dragged into the surrounding street fight. Yet here he stands, driven entirely by raw, righteous fury as he stands between the helpless victims and the syndicate, shattering the plan and initiating a chaotic, unpredictable war. The surrounding thugs freeze in sheer disbelief, completely blindsided by the recruit's sudden and reckless intervention. Jimin's heart stops as she watches their carefully planned stealth operation disintegrate into absolute chaos in a single impulsive second. A furious, desperate scream rips from her throat, demanding to know what the brainless rookie thinks he is doing by exposing them to the entire street. The frontline syndicate fighters quickly recover from their shock, turning their murderous gaze toward the isolated boy who dared to challenge them alone. From the rear of the mob, the arrogant executive scoffs in disgust, dismissing the intruders as mere neighborhood pests to be swept away and eliminated instantly. A massive, scarred brute with stitched skin across his forehead steps forward, his face twisting into a sadistic sneer as he prepares to tear the rookie apart. But before he can even raise his weapon, Jimin storms into the fray like a lightning bolt, her combat blade flashing through the dim evening air. The brute barely has time to gasp in shock, completely overwhelmed by the terrifying velocity of her sudden counterstrike. Slipping beneath his heavy, clumsy guard with perfect execution, she moves like a shadow, positioning herself for a lethal finish.
A single, blinding arc of her knife slices clean through his throat, painting the alleyway with a sudden, spectacular spray of crimson.
Enraged by their enforcer's instant death, the surrounding thugs roar in a primitive frenzy, charging at her all at once with raised weapons. Jimin catches her breath as she is instantly surrounded, her mind racing to calculate a way out of this rapidly escalating death trap. Nearby, Isu channels his panic into raw aggression, slamming a devastating strike into a thug's skull while snarling a promise of pain to anyone who steps closer. The entire street erupts into a brutal, claustrophobic war zone, filled with the heavy stench of blood and the crackle of nearby fires. Watching his defense force crumble, the red-haired executive's smug composure finally shatters as he realizes they are dealing with trained killers. A sudden, blinding explosion of fire bursts behind him, scattering his remaining guards in a chorus of agonizing screams. Terrified by the devastating strength of their opponents, the executive's lieutenant frantically warns him that they are being completely overrun. Realizing these professional killers must have been sent by a rival faction to execute them, the loyal guard begs his boss to escape while they hold the line. Cursing his terrible luck, the panicked executive turns on his heel and flees down a dark side alley, leaving his disposable pawns to die. Jimin engages another wave of attackers, her hands a blur of rapid-fire blocks and slashes as she fights desperately to clear her path. She looks up just in time to see their primary target escaping into the shadows, a wave of pure frustration washing over her. But before the target can slip away, a pair of heavy boots digs into the concrete, launching a desperate pursuit with explosive power. Refusing to let their only lead vanish, Isu barrels through the dust, screaming at the fleeing executive to halt. Suddenly, a massive syndicate vanguard steps into the light, brandishing a heavy cleaver to block the rookie's advance. The enforcer glares down at the boy, demanding to know what shadow organization sent a mere child to target their executive. Driven by sheer adrenaline and the desperation of the mission, Isu swings his weapon with everything he has, screaming for the brute to get out of his way. Metal clashes against metal with a deafening ring, but the veteran thug easily absorbs the rookie's raw, unrefined blow. With a smug smirk, the thug shifts his weight and delivers a brutal, sweeping counteroffensive that catches Isu completely off guard. From across the street, Jimin finally stands victorious over the defeated mob, her eyes instantly scanning the battlefield for her partner. Seeing him struggle, she screams at him to ignore the guards and run, reminding him that the entire mission is dead if they lose the executive. Pushing past his physical limits, Isu breaks away from the fight and charges down the narrow alleyway, desperately chasing the target's shadow. Ahead, the red-haired executive stumbles through the darkness, muttering bitter curses about the complete disaster this eviction has become. He anxiously reaches for his collar, grumbling about how much longer he must carry the syndicate's highly classified secrets before he is safe. Suddenly, a shadow looms directly over him as Isu leaps from a fire escape, raising his weapon for a decisive ambush. But his foot catches on a loose wire, sending him crashing face first onto the hard asphalt with a painful, humiliating scream. Groaning in agony, Isu pushes himself up from the ground, only for his eyes to widen in absolute horror at what lies ahead. Before he can even stand, a cold, blood-red line suddenly appears across the executive's throat as an unseen blade strikes from the darkness. The strike is so unbelievably fast and silent that the executive can only gasp in shock as his life is ruthlessly snuffed out. The dead man collapses onto the pavement, revealing a sleek, deadly figure standing calmly in the shadows with a bloody knife. With a brutal stomp to the corpse's neck, the mysterious assassin ensures the target is silenced forever, leaving nothing but a heavy, terrifying quiet.
She looks down at the trembling rookie with a chilling, predatory smile, mocking his incredibly slow and clumsy performance.
Leaning in close, she whispers a mocking piece of advice, telling him that real attacks should always be short, simple, and instantly lethal.
Her eyes glow with a terrifying, wild intensity as she introduces herself by her feared Underworld alias, the assassination master, Cheetah.
Before Isu can even react, she strikes with blinding speed, her fist slamming into his face with bone-shattering force. The devastating impact sends him flying backward, his vision spinning as his head violently strikes the concrete.
Pinning him down with effortless cruelty, Cheetah sneers at his weakness, demanding to know if he truly thought this deadly game was a joke.
By the time the sirens wail in the distance, the mysterious killer has vanished into the night, leaving behind a ruined alleyway and a crushed rookie. Back at the squad's quiet training facility, Isu sits in the dim light, the heavy silence of defeat pressing down on his chest. He replays Jimin's furious lecture over and over in his mind, finally realizing that his childish arrogance almost cost them their lives. Staring down at his bruised fist, the painful truth sinks in. In this merciless world, raw strength is nothing without the cold, calculated precision of a true killer. Following his agonizing defeat, Isu's desperate struggle for power pushes him to seek help elsewhere, his mind filled with the image of lethal, swift movements that could save his life. Deep within the training facility, a powerful, battle-hardened senior fighter finishes her grueling routine with a heavy sigh, her immense physical presence radiating raw authority. Sensing someone approaching her private sanctuary, she turns sharply, her sharp gaze locking onto the hesitant figure stepping out from the shadows. Swallowing his pride, Isu steps forward, his voice steadying as he requests the formidable warrior to take him under her wing and teach him the art of war. He looks her straight in the eye, explaining his desperate desire to master her terrifying short-range weapon techniques so he can survive the brutal streets. A slow, dangerous smirk spreads across her face as she realizes the rookie is dead serious, instantly sensing the volatile mix of desperation and potential in his eyes. She guides him to a massive arsenal of lethal blades and firearms, the cold steel whispering silent promises of destruction and power. Meanwhile, in a dark, neon-lit underworld den, a trembling syndicate lieutenant delivers the disastrous news that their operations have been utterly compromised and their top assassin is vanished. The news sends the massive, disfigured syndicate boss into a towering rage, his furious screams echoing off the walls as he curses his subordinates for failing such a simple extraction. Reaching into a velvet box, he retrieves a gold ring, his mind already calculating a brutal, overwhelming response to this humiliating defeat. His single, scarred eye glows with murderous intent as he orders his men to contact their most lethal black market partners, calling for a swift, merciless execution of the intruders. Back at the training hall, the heavy silence is instantly shattered as wooden practice swords collide in a violent, splintering clash. Pushed straight into a brutal sparring match, Isu struggles to keep up as his new mentor launches a blistering, relentless assault. She moves with terrifying, supernatural speed, her practice weapon cutting through the air like a solid iron bar as she tests the rookie's limits. The clash of wood echoes like gunfire through the concrete gym, each impact vibrating straight through Isu's bones as he desperately tries to hold his ground. But his defenses are hopelessly slow, and with a resounding crack, her wooden sword strikes him square on the head, sending a jolt of pure agony through his skull. Groaning as he clutches his throbbing head, he listens to her blunt critique, warning him that his massive, exaggerated swings leave him completely open to a lethal counterattack. She leans in close, explaining the absolute necessity of short, simple, and direct strikes to disrupt an opponent's balance before delivering a swift, decisive finish. Rubbing his bruised forehead, Isu mutters that she made her explosive movements look incredibly easy during the battle, realizing just how massive the gap in their experience truly is. Her stern demeanor suddenly melts into a playful laugh as she casually tells him to drop the formal titles and call her Big Sister, revealing a surprisingly warm side to the deadly warrior. But the warmth vanishes in an instant as she taps her weapon against the floor, commanding him to pick up his sword and prepare for the next onslaught. Staring at his shattered, shortened wooden blade, Isu points out the damage, only for his mentor to remind him that he must adapt to any weapon, especially since his primary tool is a heavy combat axe.
Suddenly, a terrifying, burning aura of intensity erupts around her as she declares that training must always mimic the life-or-death stakes of a real battlefield. Shivering under the weight of her crushing bloodlust, Isu steels his resolve, knowing that surviving this training is his only path to true strength. Far away in a cold, sterile interrogation room, the tactical squad's resident medic looms over a captured syndicate executive with a pair of steel pliers, his eyes completely emotionless. Terrified by the chilling clinical atmosphere, the captive immediately breaks, begging to confess everything before the torture even begins. But the squad leader steps forward, holding up a bizarre metallic tooth implant and demanding to know why the syndicate's high-ranking members are carrying such dangerous hidden devices. The trembling prisoner reveals a shocking secret, explaining that their syndicate was recently approached by a massive, shadowy corporation with an offer they couldn't refuse. He describes a faceless, high-tech corporate executive who presented them with a choice: submit entirely to the conglomerate's control or face total annihilation. The squad leader's face darkens as he realizes the horrifying truth. The hidden dental implants are actually high-concentration poison capsules, the ultimate price of forced corporate loyalty. The hostage confirms their worst fears, explaining that the microscopic capsule is linked to their communications, designed to detonate instantly if they attempt to leak information or flee. Appalled by this absolute disregard for human life, the commander asks how they could willingly serve under such monstrous conditions. The captive scoffs bitterly, reminding them that for street-level thugs who climbed up from the absolute gutter, sacrificing their lives is a small price to pay for ultimate power. Recognizing the extreme danger of this corporate alliance, the squad leader orders the prisoner to write down every detail of the syndicate's headquarters, floor plans, and weapon stockpiles. Meanwhile, Jimin walks down the quiet facility hallways with a first aid kit, wondering where her reckless partner could have slipped off to this time. She pushes open the door to the auxiliary training room, only for her jaw to drop in absolute disbelief at the scene unfolding inside. Right before her eyes, Isu is locked in a fierce, high-speed exchange of blows with the legendary heavy weapon specialist. A wave of pure fury washes over Jimin as she watches her student seek training from someone else, her eyes burning with intense jealousy and resentment. She realizes with bitter frustration that the stubborn rookie thinks his failure in the alleyway was due to a lack of physical strength rather than his lack of tactical discipline. Sensing Jimin's presence, the smug mentor can't help but boast, mockingly claiming that her devastating sword techniques are vastly superior to Jimin's stealthy grappling styles. Distracted by the sudden tension in the room, Isu loses his focus, only to be met with a blistering strike as his mentor demands to know where he is looking during a fight. Another heavy blow lands squarely on his head, leaving him with a massive steaming bump as his relentless instructor screams for him to get back up and fight. Standing in the hallway, Jimin puffs out her cheeks in a childish, explosive fit of jealousy, deeply offended that her partner is ignoring her guidance. Far away in a warm, sunny kindergarten classroom, a young child holds up a colorful drawing, proudly showing off what he claims is a terrifying predator. A massive, gentle giant of a man wearing a red apron leans over the desk, softly correcting the child by pointing out that the beast is actually a crocodile, his gentle demeanor completely contrasting his imposing size. Scratching his head with an embarrassed smile, the muscular teacher apologizes to the laughing children, enjoying this peaceful, quiet life far removed from his violent past. Suddenly, the classroom door opens as a fellow teacher nervously announces that a group of uninvited guests has gathered outside, their dark silhouettes looming ominously through the glass. Looking out the window, the gentle giant's heart sinks as he sees a smug, red-jacketed syndicate thug waving at him with a sickeningly familiar grin. Standing in the courtyard, the arrogant syndicate enforcer and his massive bodyguards wait impatiently, ready to drag the retired warrior back into the bloody underworld. Stepping out of the school, the muscular teacher's gentle smile completely vanishes as he prepares to face the dark shadows of his past, realizing that the peace he fought so hard to build is about to explode into absolute violence. The cocky syndicate thug steps forward, a greasy grin plastered on his face as he mockingly introduces himself to the legendary retired fighter Hwang Gian, hoping to intimidate the beast. But Hwang Gian does not hesitate. In a split second, his massive fist explodes forward, shattering the thug's arrogant smirk in a deafening spray of blood.
Before the other thugs can even react, Huang Gian delivers a brutal, lightning-fast blow, sending another massive bodyguard crashing backward against the brick walls of the schoolyard. Terrified by the crushing display of raw violence, the remaining thugs stumble backward, begging the legendary beast to stop before he completely massacres them right then and there. Huang Yan exhales a heavy sigh, looking down at his bleeding knuckles and questioning just how pathetic his old organization has become to send such weak, nameless runts to his doorstep. Trembling, the lead messenger bows deeply, desperately pleading for his help and revealing that the syndicate's boss sent them to beg a favor from an old friend. Huang Gian scoffs, reiterating that he is a civilian who has long cut his ties with the Underworld, but his cold composure shatters when they reveal that a deadly assassin is currently hunting their boss. The trembling thug quickly explains the gravity of the threat, revealing that top executives, including the vicious cheetah, have already been brutally neutralized, making their supreme leader the next target. Bowing once more, the desperate messenger begs Huang Jian to intervene for the sake of their old alliance, hoping to stir the dormant loyalty of the retired monster. A heavy, painful silence descends over the schoolyard as Huang Gian clenches his jaw, reluctantly asking for a few days to make his final decision, his mind weighed down by the shadows of a past he cannot escape. Meanwhile, the tactical squad gathers their intel, identifying the syndicate's stronghold as a massive, heavily fortified abandoned distribution center hidden deep within the industrial sector of Gangseogu. The squad leader points out that over 100 highly armed syndicate thugs patrol the perimeter, with their ruthless leader, One-Eyed Jack, entrenched in the deepest, most secure chamber of the facility. To dismantle this criminal empire once and for all, the tactical unit prepares to launch a high-stakes two-pronged offensive, dividing themselves into a stealth infiltration team and a massive frontal assault force. The opening gambit falls on Isu and Jimin, who must disguise themselves as high-ranking corporate executives to gain entry into the Lion's Den and stall for precious time until the main force arrives. Adjusting their realistic silicone masks, Jimin delivers a cold final warning to Isu to keep his mouth shut and maintain his composure, knowing that a single slip-up will mean instant death. Strutting into the syndicate's private, neon-lit lounge, they play their parts perfectly, presenting themselves as corporate representatives seeking a highly lucrative illegal import contract. Lounging in the shadows, the scarred, massive figure of One-Eyed Jack watches them with a piercing gaze, noting how unexpected it is for a legitimate pharmaceutical conglomerate to deal directly with street thugs. Playing her hand with cold calculation, Jimin immediately offers an astronomical upfront payment of 1 billion won, sliding open a briefcase filled with stacks of cash to break the tension. Jack smiles greedily, his scarred face twisting as he praises their efficiency, but the atmospheric pressure in the room suddenly drops as his single eye locks onto their credentials. Reaching into his pocket, Jack retrieves their business card and flickers a lighter, slowly watching the paper catch fire as he prepares to expose their delicate web of lies. As the card burns away, Jack's grin vanishes, replaced by a cold, murderous sneer, as he demands to know why they brought a forged credential into his sanctuary. Jimin's violet eyes lock onto him, her calm exterior remaining entirely unfazed, even as the trap springs shut and the illusion of safety vanishes in an instant. Staring at the charred remnants in his hand, Jack growls that he has handled thousands of corporate cards in his bloody career, immediately recognizing the subtle flaws of a counterfeit. Standing up with an ominous, towering physical presence, Jack explains that true Underworld representatives operate on a strict, unspoken code of trust, and this fake card has broken that trust entirely. In a flash of lethal speed, Jack pulls a heavy pistol from his coat, aiming it directly at Jimin's head as his men prepare to execute the intruders on the spot. Despite a loaded gun pressed inches from her face, Jimin does not flinch, her muscles coiled and ready to strike with lethal precision if the trigger is pulled. She stares back at the scarred crime lord with absolute, chilling silence, refusing to show a single trace of fear in the face of certain doom. Stunned by her cold resolve, Jack pauses, his murderous gaze softening into a dark, highly amused chuckle at their sheer audacity. Lowering his weapon, the psychotic boss claims he was merely testing them, laughing off the deadly threat as a simple curiosity to see if these corporate suits possess true grit. Satisfied with their balls of steel, Jack pockets the money and mockingly declares that as long as the cash is real, he does not care about the authenticity of their cards. Behind his shades, a cold sweat pours down Aisu's face as he relaxes his clenched fist, knowing that he was a fraction of a second away from launching a premature suicidal assault. Jimin keeps her eyes glued to their target, silently resolving to end Jack's life the absolute second the main strike force signals the start of the raid. Pouring a glass of whiskey, Jack leans back, casually asking his guests if they know the ultimate secret to surviving and ruling in a merciless world like his. Jimin plays along, keeping her voice completely neutral and pretending to be ignorant of the brutal philosophies of the streets to keep him talking. Swirling his drink with a sickening grin, Jack reveals his core rule: keep your enemies close and your friends as far away as possible, a philosophy forged in the fires of a brutal betrayal. The memory triggers a painful, violent flashback to their childhood, where desperate screams of agony echoed through a desolate alleyway. Years ago, a swarm of street thugs fled in sheer terror, screaming in panic as a young, unstoppable Huang Guan tore through their ranks like a rabid beast to protect his friend. Clutching his bruised, bloodied fists, a young Huang Gian stood victoriously in the dust, breathing heavily as he looked back at the boy he had just saved. Walking over, Huang Gian sternly warned his young, scarred companion Jack to be far more careful when wandering into hostile territories. Young Jack looked up with a sheepish, embarrassed grin, revealing that he had gotten caught trying to steal bread before warmly offering to share his prize with his protector. Huang Gian snatched a piece of the bread, chewing quietly as he accepted the simple gesture of friendship from the helpless boy. Sitting side by side in the cold dirt of the alleyway, the two homeless orphans quietly ate their stolen meal, wondering where they would find a safe place to sleep for the night. Young Jack sighed bitterly, expressing his deep, exhausting frustration with having to struggle for survival day after day in the gutter. Chewing on his dry bread, Jack's expression suddenly darkened, a terrifying, manic intensity creeping into his young eyes as he looked at his only friend. Clenching his jaw, the scarred boy declared with absolute chilling conviction that he would one day rise up, devour everything, and make it to the absolute top of the food chain. Tears of pure rage welled in his scarred eye as he swore a blood oath to get brutal revenge on the parents who abandoned him and the thugs who treated him like garbage. Young Huang Gian stared at him in stunned silence, realizing at that exact moment that the helpless boy he saved carried a dark, insatiable hunger that would one day consume them both. As the years passed, they became enforcers, but the divide between them only grew, marked by the cold, transactionary envelopes of cash tossed on the table after a brutal day's work. Senior gangsters routinely mock Jack, reminding him of his worthlessness and declaring that if it weren't for the supreme strength of his partner, Huang Gian, he would already be dead in a ditch. Standing in the dark shadows of the city streets, a bitter, older Jack nursed his growing resentment, cursing the superiors who constantly yelled at him and sowing the seeds of the monstrous betrayal that would soon rip their friendship apart. The bitter memories of their early days under the syndicate's boot resurface, showing a young, scarred Jack furiously complaining that their savior only treats them like stray dogs. Refusing to listen to Jack's toxic resentment, the young Huang Gian simply walks away, giving his ungrateful partner a cold ultimatum to leave if he cannot handle the grind. Left alone in the dark alleyway, Jack's expression twists into a venomous snarl, the embers of betrayal starting to burn brightly within his fractured mind. It was in that very moment of vulnerability that a sinister shadow from a rival syndicate approached, offering a devil's bargain to the desperate young thug. Back in the neon-lit sanctuary of the present, Jimin silently observes the older, monstrous Jack, realizing that his rise to power was fueled by unchecked greed and corporate backing. Jack takes a slow sip of his drink, his mind still stuck on his former brother-in-arms, silently mocking Huang Gian for choosing a life of peaceful obscurity over absolute power. The dark path Jack chose was one of pure bloodlust, determined to prove that his violent philosophy was the only way to conquer the unforgiving city. But when Huang Gian finally caught up with his partner on that fateful night, the horrific scene awaiting him shattered whatever remnants of friendship they had left. Standing in a pool of fresh blood, a manic Jack proudly held up the severed head of their former boss, declaring that the entire organization now belonged to them. With a chilling, psychotic grin, Jack began recounting the brutal final moments of the boss's innocent wife, relishing in the sheer terror he had inflicted.
The helpless woman had begged and pleaded for her life, but Jack's blackened heart felt absolutely nothing as he snuffed out her light.
Blinded by his newfound power, the crazed young monster thanked Huang Gian, believing his partner would celebrate this ruthless, bloody ascension.
Staring at the monster his friend had become, Huang Gian could only curse his own naivety, realizing that the boy he once saved was completely gone. Back in the present, the silence of the night is shattered as a massive cargo transport rumbles into the heavily guarded distribution center, signaling the start of the tactical squad's raid.
Unaware of the lurking danger, the perimeter guards march toward the vehicle, irritated by the late arrival of their scheduled delivery. Suddenly, a brilliant flash of cold steel rips through the darkness, cutting down the first guard before he can even process the lethal threat. As the bloodied corpse collapses to the cold concrete, the remaining thugs gasp in horror, their primitive defense instincts failing them completely.
Stepping out from the shadows of the truck, the deadly assassin Cheetah stands tall, ready to unleash a whirlwind of absolute slaughter. With a playful, mocking smirk, the female assassin notes that their decoy team has done an excellent job of drawing the main forces away.
Pushing off the ground with terrifying speed, she leaps forward to paint the distribution center in shades of crimson.
Her blade becomes a blur of pure lethality, carving through the Syndicate defenders with surgical, inhuman precision.
Terrified screams echo through the industrial complex as the guards realize they are completely outmatched by a legendary monster of the Underworld.
Thick fountains of blood paint the walls, proving that the infiltration squad's vanguard is an unstoppable force of nature.
Deep within the secure inner chamber, One-Eyed Jack continues to pour his expensive liquor, boastfully lecturing his corporate guests on the supreme value of information. He brags of his extensive network, claiming that his ability to collect and weaponize secrets is what keeps him at the very top of the food chain. To the crime lord, even the most insignificant street rumors can be turned into a lethal weapon if used at the perfect moment.
Leaning in closer, his scarred face twisted in amusement, Jack decides to offer his guests a piece of classified underworld gossip.
Behind his calm facade, Aisu feels a jolt of anxiety as Jack mentions the recent mysterious elimination of a legendary retired agent. Jack chuckles darkly, praising the target's unmatched killing prowess and wondering aloud why the organization would burn such a valuable asset. But before Jack can reveal the ridiculous motive behind the hit, the heavy double doors are violently thrown open by a panicked messenger. Trembling with pure terror, the bleeding guard yells that they're under attack by the very intruders they had been hunting.
Jack's face turns purple with rage as he slams his massive fist onto the table, roaring in disbelief at how their secret stronghold was compromised. Panic begins to seep into the room, with Jack cursing the terrible timing of the assault right in front of his high-paying corporate clients.
Regaining his composure, the crime lord apologizes to Jimin and Isu, urging them to evacuate while his men handled the sudden threat. But instead of fleeing, Jimin's lips curl into a beautiful, bone-chilling smile, letting him know that they have absolutely nothing to worry about. In a lightning-fast motion, she slips a concealed, razor-sharp spike from her sleeve, her polite corporate persona instantly evaporating. With lethal intent burning in her eyes, she drives the weapon straight toward the crime lord's throat to end the Syndicate's rule once and for all. Her eyes flare with a demonic violet glow as she whispers that their deceptive negotiations are officially over.
Tightening her grip on the spike, she channels every ounce of her explosive physical power into the finishing blow.
Deadly weapon slices through the air, inches away from claiming the boss's life in a single silent stroke. Letting out a fierce battle cry, she prepares to paint the pristine VIP lounge with the blood of the scarred tyrant. But at the absolute last second, Jack's loyal, tattooed bodyguard screams in desperation and throws his own body directly into the path of her blade. With a sickening tear of flesh, the sharp spike buries itself deep into the bodyguard's throat, unleashing a violent spray of crimson.
Frustrated by the sudden interruption, Jimin grits her teeth, realizing she has missed her primary target.
With ruthless efficiency, she delivers a crushing kick to the dying guard's chest, throwing his heavy corpse aside to clear her path. Utilizing the brief distraction, a terrified One-Eyed Jack scrambles backward, desperately trying to escape the room and call for reinforcements. But Aisu is already moving, his hand slipping inside his tailored suit jacket to draw his own lethal weapon. Like a coiled predator releasing its tension, the silent tactical agent lunges across the room to cut off the fleeing crime lord. A blinding flash of steel arcs upward, tearing through Jack's expensive suit and carving a deep, bloody gash across his chest. Before the dazed crime lord can even scream, Isu grapples him in a vice-like grip, preparing to drag the monster down into the abyss of his own shattered empire. The terrified crime lord breaks free, scrambling out the door with frantic desperation as his shattered composure completely vanishes. Jimin lunges forward with a furious cry, stretching out her hand to stop the fleeing tyrant before he can vanish into the labyrinth of his own fortress. But the desperate boss barely slips past, her strike scraping across his back as he careens through the doorway to find any avenue of escape.
Fuming with rage, Jimin alerts her partner that their primary target is slipping through their fingers, urging him to pursue immediately.
Isu tightens his iron grip on his weapon, his resolve hardening into a cold, unstoppable promise that the monstrous crime lord will not leave this place alive. Far down the corridor, Jack screams out in manic defiance, refusing to let his decades of bloody conquest end at the hands of these relentless invaders. A deafening, siren-like roar echoes through the entire facility, announcing a total emergency as the lower-tier syndicate members are commanded to crush the intruders. Instantly, a massive swarm of bloodthirsty thugs emerges from the shadows, armed to the teeth and hungry to tear their attackers to pieces. Spotting the legendary assassin Cheetah carving her path of destruction, the guards yell for everyone to concentrate their forces and bring her down first.
But Cheetah only laughs, her blade singing a song of death as she effortlessly parries their strikes and begins slicing through the vanguard.
Nearby, a seasoned agent in a tan jacket draws his heavy tactical baton, calmly preparing to join the chaotic fray. He mutters a complaint about being relegated to mere decoy duty against these small-time thugs, while the rookie gets the glory of chasing the big boss. Sensing a sudden presence behind him, his instincts flare as a desperate syndicate thug tries to catch him off guard from his blind spot. Without even turning his head, the seasoned veteran delivers a devastating back fist, shattering the attacker's jaw in a single brutal motion. Shrugging off the pathetic attempt on his life with cold indifference, he sighs, realizing there is no point in complaining about the mission parameters. With lethal intent burning beneath his casual demeanor, he strides forward into the sea of armed thugs, ready to unleash his own brand of absolute devastation. Meanwhile, Cheetah pauses, her eyes gleaming with magical malice as she senses a truly massive opponent approaching. A hulking colossus of a man steps forward, hoisting a massive sledgehammer onto his shoulder with a sickening, confident grin. Unfazed by his gargantuan size, Cheetah offers a mocking smile, completely unimpressed by his attempts to intimidate her.
She welcomes the challenge with open arms, declaring that cutting down a giant will make her victory feel even sweeter.
Roaring in pure fury, the giant swings his heavy sledgehammer downward, aiming to crush her into a bloody pulp with a single strike. The brute's eyes widen in sheer disbelief as his weapon smashes into empty concrete, his target vanishing like a phantom right before his eyes. In a flash of pure speed, Cheetah slips past his defenses, her razor-sharp katana slicing through the air with lethal precision. Her gaze remains entirely cold and focused, calculating the exact trajectory to dismantle the towering brute. With a sharp, clashing ring, she parries his desperate secondary swing, completely throwing him off balance. Her blade becomes a blinding streak of silver light, carving through his defenses with effortless grace. A deep, crimson line opens up across the brute's midsection, unleashing a sudden spray of hot blood as the strike hits home. Stumbling backward, the giant clutches his bleeding wound, gasping in utter shock at the sheer speed of this pint-sized monster. But Cheetah gives him no time to recover, delivering a devastating final upward slash that completely tears through his torso. The surrounding syndicate members freeze in absolute horror, watching their strongest vanguard champion collapse like a felled tree. Standing triumphantly over the massive corpse, Cheetah plunges her blade deep into his back, sending a clear, terrifying warning to any thug foolish enough to stand in her way. Deeper in the facility, Jack flees like a hunted rat, while Aisu relentlessly chases him down with an axe in hand. Looking back in sheer panic, the scarred crime lord desperately screams for his personal guards to throw themselves into the fray and block his pursuer. Two heavily armed thugs instantly step into the corridor, raising their weapons to cut off Isu's path of vengeance.
Isu grits his teeth, tightening his grip on his weapon as he prepares to carve his way through this fresh wall of meat.
Suddenly, a lethal shadow drops from the ceiling above. Jimin leaps into the hallway to back up her partner. With a single blinding slash, she cuts down the first guard before he can even register her presence. Breathing heavily, Jimin urges Isu to bypass the remaining guards and chase down Jack before the boss escapes the compound entirely. Her eyes flare with intense determination as she vows that they cannot afford to fail this mission and let the monster slip away.
Isu nods firmly, his expression turning grimly focused as he breaks into a full sprint, leaving the remaining guards to her. Bursting through the exit doors into the cold night air, a panting Jack races toward his luxury escape vehicle parked outside. Snarls of pure rage twist his scarred face as he starts the engine, swearing that he will never let these government dogs lock him away. The engine roars to life just as Isu sprints out of the warehouse, his eyes locking onto the moving vehicle. Realizing the boss is about to escape, Isu lets out a furious roar of denial, refusing to let their prey escape. With a massive burst of explosive physical power, the tactical agent leaps high into the air, throwing his body directly onto the hood of the accelerating car. The tires screech violently as Jack slams on the gas, tearing out of the compound with Isu desperately clinging to the roof. Running out of the warehouse just a moment too late, Jimin screams out in horror as she watches her captain ride the fleeing vehicle into the darkness. The tires burn rubber against the concrete, the powerful sedan speeding away into the winding mountain roads. Careening along the edge of a treacherous cliffside highway, the vehicle swerves violently in a desperate bid to shake off its unwanted passenger. Clinging to the roof for dear life with the wind howling around him, Isu braces his axe, preparing for a high-speed lethal showdown atop a runaway car. Clinging to the hood of the speeding sedan, Isu locks his fingers onto the metal frame with an iron grip, swearing that the target will not escape. Inside the cabin, Jack's eyes widen in absolute horror as he peers through the windshield, realizing the relentless agent refuses to let go. Isu grits his teeth, his expression twisting into a mask of pure fury as he prepares to shatter the final barrier between them. With a deafening crash, Isu's axe smashes through the windshield, showering the terrified crime lord in razor-sharp glass. Locking eyes with his prey, the agent roars a chilling command to halt the runaway vehicle immediately. But Jack refuses to submit, glass continuing to spray everywhere as the chaotic struggle atop the dashboard intensifies. Refusing to let the tyrant slip away, Isu strikes again, his voice carrying the cold weight of a long-awaited execution. Cursing in sheer panic, Jack violently jerks the steering wheel, desperately trying to fling his pursuer off the car as the vehicle swerves out of control. The tires shriek against the asphalt as the sedan hurtles toward the edge of the treacherous mountain pass. With a violent smash, the car tears straight through the guardrail, plunging into the dark abyss of the cliffside. A deafening roar echoes through the valley as the metal frame crumples against the steep rocks, spinning into a catastrophic wreck. Farther down at the base of the mountain, a sleek black car screeches to a halt outside a quiet industrial warehouse. Hearing the distant commotion, a lone figure standing guard outside the facility turns his attention toward the winding roads. The man's face darkens as he whispers the name of the escaping tyrant, his instincts telling him that the final confrontation is near. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoes through the dark night, forcing the guard to look up in pure confusion. Within seconds, a frantic figure runs past the shadows of the warehouse, desperately seeking refuge from the impending disaster. In the distance, the ruined getaway car erupts into a violent ball of flame, lighting up the scrapyard in a hellish orange glow. Out of the shadows of the wreckage, a heavy foot steps firmly onto the ash-covered ground, marching toward the light. Exhausted and bleeding, One-Eyed Jack stumbles away from the burning vehicle, coughing heavily as his vision begins to blur. In his dazed state, painful fragments of his childhood flash before his eyes, a mother's empty promise of return that left him completely abandoned. Jack gasps for air, sweat and blood dripping down his scarred face as the traumatic memories of his past refuse to stay buried. He remembers the cruel laughter of the street thugs who tormented him with a lighter, mocking his weakness when he was just a helpless boy.
He recalls the mysterious, towering silhouette of a corporate agent who entered his dark world, offering a twisted path to survival. The memory of a brutal rejection burns in his mind, recalling the day he was cast aside like worthless trash by those he sought to please. Shaking off the ghosts of his youth, the battered crime lord looks up, finally understanding the true motive behind his pursuer's relentless chase. Kneeling in the dirt, a wounded Isu struggles to catch his breath, his eyes fixed on the man who holds the answers to his family's dark history. Jack spits out blood, revealing that he finally recognizes the familiar lineage running through the rookie agent's veins. Isu's heart stops as a wave of shock washes over him, realizing the crime lord knows the deepest secrets of his past. Amidst the crackling flames, Jack taunts him, explaining that a deadly warrant had been issued for his family long ago. The boss chuckles darkly, admitting he had forgotten the old grudge until he saw the uncanny resemblance in Isu's face. Fueled by a lifetime of unanswered questions, Isu surges to his feet, demanding to know the truth about his father. Jack's eyes widen slightly, surprised by the raw, unbridled fury radiating from the young agent. Drawing a massive machete, the tyrant mockingly asks if his target was truly left entirely in the dark about his father's bloody legacy. Isu ignores the bait, his eyes narrowing as he demands a straight answer, refusing to let his emotions compromise his focus. Jack remembers the legendary figure of Isu's father, a flawless, terrifying monster who ruled the underworld with an iron fist. He recalls his younger self bleeding on the floor, helpless and terrified beneath the overwhelming presence of that unstoppable warrior. Tightening his grip on his blade, Jack mutters that the father possessed an absolute, terrifying resolve that the son could never hope to match. Gritting his teeth, the scarred tyrant sneers that he senses absolutely no such conviction in Isu's weak eyes. With a deafening roar, Isu leaps forward, swinging his axe downward to silence the monster's mockery once and for all. He screams in defiance, declaring that he does not care about the archaic rules of their bloody, corrupt world. But with terrifying speed, Jack easily parries the heavy strike, mockingly pointing out the rookie's sluggish form. Refusing to back down, Isu forces another desperate swing, determined to break through the crime lord's defense. Slipping past the aggressive strike with effortless grace, Jack maneuvers directly into Isu's blind spot. With a brutal, mocking laugh, the veteran gangster delivers a heavy punch straight to the rookie's chest. The force of the blow sends Isu crashing hard against the concrete, his breath completely stolen from his lungs. Nearby, a massive fuel barrel catches fire, exploding with a violent roar that threatens to consume the entire scrapyard. Struggling to his feet, Isu leaps away from the spreading inferno, his senses overwhelmed by the intense heat and smoke. Standing tall amidst the raging flames, the tactical agent prepares himself for the final lethal clash against his father's old foe. Out of the corner of his eye, his sharp instincts flare as he catches a sudden movement cutting through the smoke. With a monstrous roar of his own, Jack charges through the curtain of fire, swinging a burning drum barrel directly at his cornered prey. The wind shrieks as the battle intensifies, and Isu's eyes widen in sheer disbelief at the shocking velocity of the scarred crime lord's assault. Stealing his nerves, the young agent braces for the impact, trying to predict whether the incoming strike will come from the left or the right. Before he can react, a massive, scarred hand thrusts directly toward his face, threatening to rip his focus away entirely. Panic sets in as Isu realizes the move was a clever feint, designed solely to blindside his defense and leave him wide open. The distance between them vanishes in an instant as Jack charges forward, slipping past his guard with terrifying ease. A sickening tear of metal and flesh echoes through the air as Jack's blade connects with brutal precision. Blood sprays across the cold ground as Isu cries out in agony, his vision blurring from the sudden, agonizing impact. Standing over him, Jack sneers with absolute contempt, mocking the lack of spirit and resolve in the young agent's sloppy movements. The tyrant's words cut deeper than any blade, taunting Isu for failing to inherit a single ounce of his legendary father's monstrous strength. With a chilling glare, Jack spits out a final insult, declaring that the legendary father must be looking down in utter shame from the depths of hell. Sparks fly as their weapons clash once more in a desperate struggle, the screech of steel grinding against steel filling the night. Amidst the chaos, a sudden spark of realization flares in Isu's eyes as he locks onto a fatal pattern in the veteran gangster style. He notices that while Jack's strikes are fast and ferocious, his swings are wide, leaving a split-second opening right after every attack. A vital piece of advice from his tactical training flashes through his mind: to target the wrist or hand where the movement is shortest. Gritting his teeth, Isu pours every ounce of his remaining strength into his grip, preparing for one single, final gamble. With a blinding arc of steel, Isu unleashes a lightning-fast counterslash, catching the tyrant completely off guard. Jack's eyes widen in absolute shock as the cold reality of the strike registers on his scarred face. The blade tears cleanly through the air, delivering a devastating blow directly across the crime lord's chest. The tyrant's face twists into a mask of pure agony as blood splatters across his dazed expression. Letting out a blood-curdling roar of pain, Jack stumbles back as a torrent of blood erupts from his freshly carved wound. Meanwhile, back at the main facility, a pink-haired agent cuts through the syndicate reinforcements with fluid, lethal grace. Beside her, her partner in the yellow jacket delivers a crushing punch that sends another armed thug crashing to the concrete. Within moments, the duo stands victorious over a mountain of defeated enemies, completely unfazed by the overwhelming numbers. The remaining survivors tremble in absolute terror, utterly horrified by the monstrous strength of the two intruders. Shaking her head in disappointment, the pink-haired agent remarks that these syndicate thugs are nothing more than common neighborhood hooligans. She urges her partner to wrap up the operation quickly, only to be interrupted by a commanding voice echoing from the shadows. A battle-hardened man with a bandaged nose steps forward from the darkness, demanding to know if they are the ones hunting Jack. The surviving thugs instantly erupt in cheers, recognizing the powerful commander who has arrived to salvage the situation. The newcomer fixes his sharp gaze on the two agents, his expression deadpan as he assesses the threat before him. He offers them a cold ultimatum, warning them that he will handle his gang's business and that they should leave if they want to live. The agent in the yellow jacket chuckles, immediately recognizing the legendary name his captain warned him about and claiming the target for himself. Smiling playfully, the pink-haired woman steps back, letting her partner take the lead while she prepares to clean up the rest of the garbage. The rival commander grips his heavy metal bat, stating that he will have to change his method of communication to get his point across. Walking forward with the bat slung over his shoulder, he questions their true motives, wondering if they are after Jack's wealth or simple revenge. The pink-haired agent brushes off the question with a smirk, mocking him for asking such personal details upon their very first meeting. Her smile turns icy as she tells him to simply view them as the cleaners sent to sweep away trash like him. The commander's eyes narrow as he counters her arrogance, asking how they are any different if they are killing people the exact same way. Annoyed by his moralizing, she mutters that his preachy attitude is just as insufferable as her captain's. Without another word, she lunges forward, swinging her blade in a vicious attempt to silence him permanently. With a deafening clash, the commander blocks the strike with his bat, admitting he knows the crime lord crossed the line long ago. Forcing her blade back, he shouts in anger that it was his own failure to stop Jack that led to this catastrophic mess. His eyes burn with absolute resolve as he declares that he must take responsibility and end this nightmare with his own hands. He swings his heavy bat downward with terrifying force, smashing the concrete to establish his unstoppable authority. Watching him with a mixture of amusement and disgust, the agent sighs, stating that she despises self-righteous old men who act high and mighty the most. Back at the base of the mountain, a colossal fire rages through the scrapyard, illuminating the dark night with a hellish orange glow. Clutching his bleeding side, Isu stumbles through the smoke, his body screaming in agony from the cumulative damage of the crash and the fight. Knowing his strength is fading fast, he realizes he must find a way to contact the rest of his team before it's too late. Suddenly, his combat instincts flare as a chilling breeze cuts through the suffocating heap behind him. Out of the raging flames, a bloody Jack leaps forward with a monstrous scream, swinging his weapon down in a desperate bid for mutual destruction. Refusing to succumb to death, the wounded tyrant roars in pure madness, determined to drag the young agent down to hell with him. Fueled by a lifetime of resentment, Isu unleashes a desperate scream of fury as his axe begins its descent, refusing to let his life be dictated by a corrupt legacy. Pouring every ounce of his remaining strength into the strike, he vows to break free from the chains of his father's bloody shadow and finally live on his own terms. But Jack lets out a manic roar of his own, his scarred face twisting with rage as he demands to know who this arrogant rookie thinks he is to interfere. With a sickening tear of flesh, the young agent's weapon cuts deep, drawing a torrent of dark blood as the veteran crime lord's defense finally falters. Jack screams in agony, the devastating force of the strike tearing through his body and shattering his monstrous composure. Yet, fueled by pure, unyielding madness, the bleeding giant lunges forward, gripping Aisu's collar with a terrifying iron-tight hold.
His veins bulging and his eyes wide with lethal intent, the tyrant refuses to let go, determined to drag the boy down with him into the abyss.
Choking under the crushing pressure, Aisu lets out a painful gasp, the agonizing grip threatening to steal his consciousness entirely. He grits his teeth, desperate to break free as the suffocating heat of the raging fire closes in around them. Summoning a final explosive burst of adrenaline, Isu drives his weapon down with terrifying force, forcing the monster to finally release his grip and stumble backward. Blood dripping from his lips, Jack lets out a wheezing, maniacal laugh, recognizing the terrifying, untamed spark in the young agent's eyes. Slumping heavily against the debris, the dying tyrant mutters that only a warrior with that exact monstrous resolve is worthy of surviving this brutal world. He looks up at the panting rookie, mockingly asking if he has ever wondered why the powerful Chongdo syndicate has been hunting his family so relentlessly. Aisu flinches in shock as Jack delivers a chilling, unexpected truth. The all-powerful syndicate is chasing them because they are absolutely terrified of what Aisu might become. Jack sneers, questioning what men who rule the underworld with absolute wealth and power could possibly fear from a lone, unproven rookie. Coughing up dark blood, the veteran gangster prepares to spit out the final, crucial secret that could change everything. But before the words can leave his lips, a sudden, muffled gunshot echoes through the smoke, and Jack instantly collapses to the ground, lifeless. Isu's eyes widen in absolute disbelief as he stares down at the tyrant's motionless body, his mind struggling to comprehend the sudden execution. His sharp combat instincts flare as his gaze immediately darts toward the distant abandoned excavator sitting in the shadows of the scrapyard. Before he can investigate, desperate footsteps shatter the silence as his worried teammates sprint through the clearing, shouting his name. The battle-hardened captain angrily reprimands the rookie, demanding to know why he pulled such a reckless, suicidal stunt without backup. Meanwhile, in the secondary warehouse, the pink-haired agent's blade clashes violently against the rival commander's heavy metal bat in a shower of sparks. Suddenly, her cold eyes glint behind her glasses as she abruptly halts her momentum, calling for an immediate ceasefire. With chilling calm, she delivers a sudden declaration that their primary target, One-Eyed Jack, has already been permanently eliminated. The commander freezes in utter shock, his weapon still raised as the devastating news disrupts all of his plans. Back at the main site, a female agent quickly applies a tight bandage to Isu's bleeding side, lecturing him that he would have bled to death if they had arrived a minute later. Aisu barely hears her, his intense focus locked entirely on the perfectly placed gunshot wound drilled directly into Jack's temple. He calculates the distance and angle, absolutely certain that the quiet, high-precision shot could only have been fired from the driver's cab of the yellow excavator. A chilling realization settles in. If Chongdo had ordered the sniper strike, they would have easily taken his life as well, meaning the hidden shooter purposefully spared him. As his teammate finishes wrapping his wounds, Isu's mind races with the terrifying implication that a mysterious shadow player is actively protecting him. He stares into the darkness, silently pleading for answers as he wonders who this invisible ally is and what dark motive they have for keeping him alive. Atop the high crane, a masked sniper clad in a black hood slowly lowers his high-caliber rifle, vanishing into the night as silently as a ghost. Deep in the shadows of this massive conspiracy, a mysterious blonde woman places a finger to her lips, keeping the ultimate secret safely hidden from the light. Back in the secondary warehouse, the pink-haired agent's strike is a blur of lethal precision, her blade cutting through the air with terrifying velocity. The battle-hardened commander barely manages to intercept the blow, his muscles straining under the raw pressure of her relentless assault. Frustrated by her merciless efficiency, he roars in anger, questioning if her organization truly believes that slaughtering everyone is the only way to solve their problems. But the tactical agent remains completely unfazed, her aggressive swings forcing him back onto his heels as she dominates the battlefield. Then, with effortless grace, she suddenly steps back, coldly repeating her demand for the useless combat to stop. Pointing her blade downward, she officially declares that their mission is over and that One-Eye Jack has been successfully neutralized. The commander lowers his bat in silent defeat, realizing with a trace of bitter irony that he was incredibly lucky to survive her blade. Suddenly, the yellow-jacketed agent steps forward, gasping in horror as the surviving syndicate thugs begin convulsing and foaming at the mouth. The young agent realizes with dread that the thugs were fitted with built-in poison devices, programmed to activate the exact second Jack's vital signs ceased. The captain walks up to join his team, staring down at the tragic scene and coldly noting that the ruthless Cheongdo syndicate never leaves a single loose end behind. Kneeling beside the lifeless bodies of his former comrades, the commander is consumed by grief, while the captain offers a quiet, solemn apology for the inevitable tragedy. The agents watch in silence, fully aware that this grim, horrific mass suicide is the direct result of the dark path Jack chose to walk. The captain fixes his gaze on the commander, asking if he has any theories as to why the syndicate was so desperate to recruit Jack in the first place. He recalls Jack's bloody rise to power, a merciless, ambitious monster who would gladly slaughter anyone if it meant climbing to the top of the food chain. Jack was the perfect, mindless tool for the syndicate's dirty work, an aggressive weapon willing to do anything to secure his position. But the moment Jack's gang aligned themselves with Cheongdo as their backer, they crossed a dangerous line, stepping into a world of violence they could never hope to control. Staring down at the tragic wreckage of his old friend, the commander is left to wonder how many more lives will be utterly destroyed in this endless, bloody cycle of ambition and betrayal. Desperate to survive the fallout of Jack's defeat, the rival commander decides to cooperate, offering to reveal everything he knows about the shadowy puppet masters of Cheongdo. Back at the hideout, Jimin unleashes her furious worry on Isu, berating him for his reckless, suicidal stunt that nearly cost him his life. Isu quiets her rage with a shocking truth, explaining that he took the risk because One-Eyed Jack held vital long-lost secrets about his father's past. He recalls the dying tyrant's final chilling words, a warning that the all-powerful Cheongdo syndicate is hunting his family because they are absolutely terrified of what Isu might become. The captain listens in heavy silence as the legendary, blood-soaked shadow of Isu's father looms over their conversation. He reveals that before Isu's father arrived, the Underworld was a chaotic battlefield until a single elite agent ruthlessly conquered the streets for Cheongdo. Stunned by his father's massive legacy, Isu demands to know how a simple orphan could have ever climbed to such monstrous heights. The captain grimly explains that after seizing control of the Underworld, Isu's father was forced to vanish into the shadows to escape the very monsters he had empowered. A dark realization hits the young agent as he wonders if the syndicate's new chairman assassinated his father out of cold, calculated revenge. Yet, too many pieces of the puzzle do not fit, leaving Isu with a nagging suspicion that an even deeper conspiracy is pulling the strings. Meanwhile, in the cold, pristine heights of their corporate headquarters, the ruthless executives of Cheongdo calmly receive word of Jack's sudden demise. The elite secretary reports that the mysterious team responsible for the hit remains completely unidentified, confirming that all remaining witnesses were systematically silenced. High above the city, the syndicate's central command structure prepares to launch its next phase, entirely unfazed by the rising body count below. Standing before a glowing digital map, the directors pinpoint their next target, a massive urban redevelopment project in the heart of the city. Their strategy is devious. They will systematically sabotage the local public security, forcing the desperate populace to rely on Cheongdo's private forces. To trigger this chaos, they decide to exploit and fuel the brutal, ongoing street wars between local rival gangs. When asked how they will manipulate these low-level thugs, a ruthless executive reveals that Jack's stolen shipment of illicit drugs is the perfect bait to ignite a bloodbath.
Deep within the dark, maze-like industrial docks, the volatile cargo sits ready to explode into a wave of violence across the city. By leaking the location of the drugs to the desperate remnants of Jack's gang, they will spark an uncontrollable frenzy of greed and blood.
With the pieces in place, the cold-hearted director authorizes the deployment of their shadow assets to orchestrate the impending massacre.
Tapping his fingers with quiet anticipation, he prepares to unleash a wave of terror that will completely bend the city to Chengdo's will.
He sneers, ordering a close watch on the mysterious nobodies who interfered in the previous battle, eager to crush them if they dare step out of the shadows again. Back at the agency's hidden warehouse base, a rare moment of domestic silence blankets the morning after the storm.
Jimin carefully tightens the bandages around Isu's torso, advising him that he needs at least a week of solid rest if he wants his body to fully recover. Isu sheepishly apologizes for constantly being a burden, only for Jimin to sharply retort that she is tired of playing his protective mother. He mutters a quiet joke under his breath, quickly backpedaling with a nervous grin when her cold glare instantly demands a retraction.
The playful argument is cut short as their red-haired teammate swings the door open, cheerfully announcing that breakfast is finally served. Relieved to escape Jimin's intensity, Isu eagerly digs into his meal, savoring the simple comfort of hot food.
Over the next 2 weeks of slow recovery, the rookie begins to truly observe and understand the bizarre, quiet lives of his fellow team members. He notes that the captain and Hana disappear regularly to gather intel, always returning spotless and untouched by conflict.
The team's eccentric doctor remains a complete shut-in, his eyes permanently glued to his phone except during mealtimes.
Meanwhile, the carefree Hwangjun frequently visits Isu's room, enthusiastically promising to train him hard the second he is fully healed. Yet it is Jimin who keeps the closest eye on him, her constant nagging masking a deep protective instinct that keeps the entire base running.
As the meal ends, Jimin breaks the silence by asking if he has any plans, catching the recovering rookie completely off guard. She leads him directly to the training hall, declaring that it is time he learned the basic, lethal combat techniques of a shadow agent. Overriding his mild protests, she insists that she won't let him walk into another fight unprepared, demanding his absolute focus.
She pulls a weapon, explaining that in real combat, a throwing knife is a vital tool of survival that every agent must master. With an effortless flick of her wrist, she demonstrates a spring-loaded sleeve mechanism that instantly drops the lethal blade directly into her palm. She warns him that in the heat of battle, the speed of drawing a hidden blade is the precise difference between living and dying. In a blur of movement, she throws the knife with terrifying precision, the steel embedding itself dead center into the target's bullseye. She locks eyes with him, explaining that the ultimate goal is simple, ending the enemy's life in a single, flawless strike.
Astounded by her effortless lethality, Isu asks how long she has been practicing such dangerous skills.
She reveals that both she and Hana were raised under the captain's watchful eye from childhood, learning to fight almost before they could walk.
She chuckles dryly, recalling how the captain used to call these brutal survival drills playing together when they were children. A bittersweet realization washes over Isu as he realizes his own chaotic childhood under his father's watch was not so different after all. But as the golden sunset casts long shadows over the towering city skyline, an ominous tension rises, signaling the calm before an unstoppable storm. Deep within the city's underbelly, a rundown bar serves as a quiet gathering point for the desperate remnants of the local gangs.
Inside, the air is thick with tension as hardened thugs knock back drinks, waiting for the spark that will ignite their next violent clash. Suddenly, a massive gang leader erupts in anger, staring down at the useless items brought back by his scout. He furiously demands to know why the scout brought back worthless trash, completely unaware that the countdown to their destruction has already begun. Tossed a meager scrap of bread like a stray dog, the young gang scout is coldly ordered to eat and vanish before he incurs any further wrath. Crouched in the dark corner of the syndicate's rowdy hideout, the boy silently chews his dry meal, completely invisible to the monsters surrounding him. But his silent, watchful glare does not go unnoticed, instantly drawing the aggressive suspicion of a volatile thug nearby. Inside the rowdy bar, the air thickens with hostility as members of the rival Geoksapa gang openly mock the weaker thugs, pushing the tension to an absolute breaking point. Tempers flare as they sneer at Jack's orphan crew, treating them like masterless dogs who are already marked for the grave. The verbal insult instantly sparks a brutal flash of violence, a sudden, bloody strike tearing through the dim light of the bar. Wiping the blood from his knuckles, a ruthless thug sneers at the pathetic display, curses his wretched luck, and walks away from the fresh corpse. Just as the dust begins to settle, a towering, silhouetted figure slams the back door open, casting a suffocating shadow over the room. A team of impeccably dressed, cold-eyed corporate enforcers strides into the chaotic bar, their silent presence instantly freezing the room's chaotic energy. Witnessing their arrival, the young boy's eyes narrow with a chilling intensity, recognizing the arrival of real killers. Outside the alleyways, a drunk, low-level thug stumbles away from the noise to relieve himself against a graffiti-stained wall, completely oblivious to the danger creeping up behind him. He mutters a bitter curse about his miserable life, utterly unaware that his time on this earth has just run out. A crushing, devastating blow slams into his jaw, instantly shattering his teeth and sending a spray of blood into the cold night air. The corporate enforcers descend upon him like wolves, unleashing a relentless, bone-breaking assault that leaves him screaming for mercy. Watching from behind a wooden door, the young scout trembles in sheer terror, realizing these monsters are operating on a completely different level of cruelty. Gasping through a mouthful of blood, the battered thug desperately begs to know who his attackers are. The blonde enforcer looks down with a mocking, sociopathic grin, telling the pathetic thug that he already knows exactly why they are here. The cold-eyed female agent steps forward, demanding the precise location of the massive drug shipment their late boss siphoned from the syndicate. Sweating profusely under the threat of death, the terrified thug stammers a desperate plea of absolute ignorance. A sudden, razor-sharp gleam of a box cutter slices through the darkness, held mere inches from his trembling flesh. With chilling nonchalance, the blonde enforcer offers a mock apology, slicing the air to prove that physical pain is a far faster method of communication. From the dark shadows of the alley, the young boy watches the interrogation, his heart pounding against his ribs as the syndicate's true ruthlessness is laid bare. Confirming the target's stubborn silence, the enforcer quickly uploads the secured data to the security team's main server, ordering an immediate cross-reference. Suddenly, the enforcer's cold gaze pivots to the side, locking directly onto the dumpster where the young boy is hiding. Instead of attacking, the blonde agent casually tosses a smartphone toward the startled child, noting that the streets are always hungry for gossip. He tells the boy to sell the phone's contents to the highest bidder, promising a massive payout for whoever spreads the information. With a sinister smirk, he instructs the young scout to ensure the explosive rumors spread like wildfire across every corner of the city. Turning his attention back to the bleeding, broken thug on the asphalt, the enforcer prepares to extract the final piece of the puzzle. Shoving a glowing screen directly into the battered man's face, he coldly demands to know if this is the man responsible for Jack's downfall. Illuminated on the digital screen is none other than Isu's face, signaling that the corporate monsters have officially locked on to their next target.